Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. American Comics. Lord of Hell. Chapter 81. It's hard, we can't fight S.H.I.E.L.D. at all, we don't even know where they're shipping the looms. Sloane sighed and said, taking a step back, even if we can get the textile machine back, we will not be able to carry out the mission as before because S.H.I.E.L.D. will be watching us. Everyone's hearts sank, and Abetu asked unwillingly, is this the end of the Assassin Brotherhood? Our mission has been passed down for thousands of years. The other assassins were equally unwilling. At this time, Mystique said, there is a way to solve your troubles, and it can also solve the troubles of us mutants. Sloane asked warily, what method? Mystique asked, ever heard of space-based weapons? I've heard of setting up instruments on satellites or space stations, throwing objects and emitting energy lasers. Sloane nodded and said, the energy laser technology is not enough, and the actual object is too heavy. At least a tungsten rod weighing several tons is impossible to transport. Therefore, space-based weapons have always been just a concept. It's just a concept for humans, not for us mutants. We have the ability to transport tungsten rods to the space station. Mystique smiled and said, the space-based weapon is powerful. A tungsten rod can destroy a city. It is safe and pollution-free. Many people call it the Rod of God. Firefox reacted and asked in shock, do you want to use space-based weapons to wipe out humans? Of course not, don't think of me as evil. Mystique said, I just want to threaten humanity into releasing all the mutants so that they allow us to establish a nation. After a pause, Mystique looked at Sloane and others, and continued, and, let them return the Loom of Destiny so that they will no longer interfere with you. That said, if humans don't accept her conditions, Mystique will definitely teach humans a lesson. As for the location, no need to ask, of course it's our old friend New York. As the saying goes, it's better to be experienced than to be a stranger. Threat to humanity. Firefox and others were a little excited, but Sloane shook his head repeatedly. What a joke, he just wanted to get rich. Threatening human beings is almost impossible to succeed. Even if he succeeds, the consequences will not be good. He really thinks that human beings are vegetarians. Ah. Mystique, let us go. We have no interest in cooperating with you. The Assassin Brotherhood exists to protect humans, not to threaten humans with guns. Sloane righteously refused. Mystique smiled, walked to Sloane, and whispered, if I tell them about you, do you think they will let you go? Sloane, today, you either agree, or turn into a corpse and have people carry it out. Sloane was shocked, how could Mystique know everything? He thought for a while and asked, Mystique, your Brotherhood of Mutants has so many talents, why do you want help from our Brotherhood of Assassins? Don't you hate humans very much? After Magneto was arrested, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been hunting down our Brotherhood. We have suffered heavy losses and there are very few manpower available now. Otherwise, we would not need to recruit you at all. Mystique sighs, in fact, the Brotherhood's loss would have been greater if she hadn't been disguised as Senator Kelly. Sloane was silent for a while and asked the others, this may be our only chance to get back the Loom of Destiny. What do you think? Another disgusting human being. Mystique snorted secretly. Sloane seemed to be asking for other people's opinions, but in fact, he had already preset a position. The Loom of Destiny must be brought back. Firefox answered without any hesitation, and the others nodded. Sloane sighed and said, then we will fight once, but Mystique, we have conditions. Mystique said, tell me about it. First, we have to follow you to the space station. Only in this way can our interests be guaranteed. Sloane said, second, we need to know your detailed plan. Cooperation is okay, but we are not intended to be cannon fodder. No problem, you can go to the space station with us. The space shuttle is not big and you can't bring too many people. In addition, you will have to undergo space training for the next half-month. Mystique said, as for the specific plan, I can tell you now. Toad, Misty, help them loosen their bonds. Toad and the others nodded. Soon, Sloane and the others were free. Then, Mystique turned on the projector, pointed at the picture of the space shuttle above and introduced, the Stark Group is going to send Dr. Reed and his team to the space station. I'm going to hijacking a space shuttle as Senator Kelly. Then, we took the tungsten rods to the space station to execute the space-based plan and make mankind surrender under the tungsten rods. Quote, with the help of Senator Kelly, hijacking the space shuttle will definitely not be a problem. Sloane nodded and asked, Mystique, your plan doesn't seem to require our help. I need you to help me stop two people. Mystique changed the picture and said, Andrew Wong is the chairman of Rebirth Group. He sold the space station to Tony Stark. For this space experiment, two people from Rebirth Group will go with him. In other words, Andrew Wong will be there when the time comes. Quote, so what? Just a pretty boy. The Tinker clenched his fists and said with a displeased look on his face, I like to deal with such a pretty boy. If I punch him, he will cry so miserably. It's more than addictive. Everyone quietly stayed away from the Tinker, and after identification, he was a pervert. Take him down. He can knock you down with one finger. Toad said disdainfully. Mystique nodded and said, don't underestimate him. Magneto was defeated by him. He is a super kung fu master and is good at fighting with umbrellas. The kung fu master who defeated Magneto. Sloane and others were a little shocked. This pretty boy could actually defeat the famous Magneto. The Tinker became even more unhappy when he heard this. He was handsome and could fight. Why should all the benefits belong to him? Mystique did not tell more information, so as not to scare Sloane and the others away. She continued, no matter what, Andrew King cannot be allowed to enter the base. Sloane, you have to send someone to stop him halfway. Sloane asked, he is so powerful, how can we stop him? Although Andrew Wong is not a pervert, he is definitely not a serious person. Mystique looked at Firefox and said, you can send Firefox to seduce him, or you can cause a car accident on his way to prevent him from moving forward. Your mission is not to defeat him, that is impossible, your mission is to contain him and make him miss the time to go to the base. Quote, I'm okay. Firefox nodded without any hesitation, as long as she could get back the Destiny Loom, she would do anything. Sloane's eyes flickered. If he guessed correctly, Mystique had concealed some information. However, he thought about it and did not object. If that's the case, it's not too difficult. Who is the other person who wants to stop her? Quote, he is one of the bipolar mutants, Professor Charles, who is holding us back every day. Mystique replaced the picture of Professor Charles and said, your assassin brotherhood has amazing sniper capabilities and can even hit targets several kilometers away. I want you to send people to target the Mutant Academy and threaten Professor Charles who is out. No, he went back to the Academy to use the brainwave enhancement device. Mystique added, I checked. Professor Charles will be out that day and not in the Academy. You don't have to worry about being controlled by him. Leave this matter to me. Although I am not the strongest sniper in the Brotherhood, I have never failed to kill a target. The Assassin Brotherhood's strongman Big Beidou nodded and said that the Brotherhood's strongest sniper is Cross, but he has betrayed the Brotherhood. Mystique said, okay, if you need any help, just ask. I will use Senator Kelly's power and financial resources to fully support you. Anyway, it will expire soon. Sloane and Beidou laughed at the same time, then were welcome. This is the basic plan. As long as Andrew Wong and Professor Charles are stopped, the space-based project will be successful. By then, everything we want and everything you want will be available. Mystique said, no matter how strong Andrew Wong is, he can't fly to the space station and beat us up. In fact, Mystique has prepared some backups, but they probably won't be used. Can you get everything? Greed flashed in Sloane's eyes, maybe he could get more. More than half a month later, at the rocket launch base outside New York, Tony Stark personally came to see Dr. Reed and the others off. There are a total of 5 people in space this time: Susan Stone, the future Invisible Woman; Frank Custer, the future Mr. Fantastic; Dr. Reed, the future Mr. Fantastic; Ben, the future Stone Man; Jonathan Stone, future Human Torch, Susan's brother. Jonathan Stone was selected mainly because of Susan's face. This boy, who is suspected of being the illegitimate son of Captain America, relies on his handsome appearance to spend all day drinking and picking up girls, similar to Tony Stark in the past. Of course, Jonathan Stone also has real abilities. He is an astronaut himself. It is worth mentioning that all 5 of them were wearing blue and green uniforms produced by the Rebirth Group, a man-made fiber that is very similar to human skin. Tony walked up to Dr. Reed with his bodyguard Happy and said, Dr. Reed, I have fulfilled all the conditions you have put forward. Don't let me down. Don't worry, I won't let you down, nor will I let humans down. This experiment will definitely be successful. Dr. Reed said confidently. At the same time, he glanced at Susan secretly. After the experiment was successful, Susan would definitely fall in love with him again. That's good. Tony nodded. This experiment is of great significance. It can not only cure hundreds of diseases, but also increase the share price of Stark Group and completely complete the transformation. The transformation from an arms tycoon to an energy tycoon. Then, Tony walked up to Susan and asked, Miss Stone, isn't that guy with the whole body on fire here? On the road, he is always busy, although I don't know what he is busy with. Susan shook her head. She requested to go to the space station this time. She is a biologist and has research to do. I knew what he was up to, but I was afraid of being beaten to death by him, so I couldn't say anything. Tony spread his hands, and Susan thought he was joking and didn't pay much attention. After chatting for a while for 2 days, all preparations were completed and we were ready to board the plane at any time. The space shuttle was tied to the booster rocket. At this moment, a group of people suddenly walked in from outside. Who is in charge of security at the rocket base? How come anyone can come in? Tony was a little dissatisfied. Happy was about to admit his mistake when he suddenly remembered that he was not responsible here. Mystique, who transformed into Senator Kelly, walked up to Tony, stretched out her hand, and said with a smile, Mr. Stark, please don't mind coming to the door. Senator Kelly, why are you here? Tony was stunned for a moment. He couldn't chase the person away because of his high position. He stepped forward to shake hands with the person. At this moment, he felt a pain in his index finger, as if he had been pricked by a needle. Tony was startled. Just as he was about to say something, Mystique said in her own voice, paralysis needle. This voice, you are. Tony was shocked. He wanted to do something, but he felt weak all over. He couldn't even stand still and fell towards Mystique. Mystique caught Tony and smiled. Yes, it's me again, Mr. Stark, congratulations on becoming my prisoner again. Congratulations to your family. If it wasn't for his lack of strength, Tony would definitely have yelled loudly, and he was actually captured by mutants again. Where will he be tied up this time? Could it be the rockets? Let Tony go. Happy reacted and rushed towards Mystique with the Mark suit box. At this moment, a tongue shot from the side, wrapped around the box and retracted. Just as Happy was about to chase him, Big Steel Tooth came over, grabbed his neck and threw him out hard. Bang! Happy hit the wall and passed out. At the same time, Sloane and other mutants pointed guns at everyone. Everyone was shocked and did not dare to move at will. Frank immediately stood in front of the proprietress Susan. He was a little hesitant and didn't know whether to summon the suit. At this time, Andrew's voice sounded in his mind. Just protect Susan, don't worry too much about the rest. Is this coming back to life again? Frank was a little shocked, and Andrew smiled and said, Dahuo, speaking of it, you Americans are living a really difficult life. It has only been a month since the hate incident. Frank was speechless. How terrible is life in the United States? Even the devil complained about it. I think you should change your bodyguard. Mystique said to Tony. This one is too fat. Tony regained a little strength and said with difficulty, don't hurt him. Wow, you guys have such a deep bond. Mystique smiled, changed back to her original appearance, and then said to everyone, don't worry, as long as you cooperate well, we won't hurt you. What exactly do you want to do? Dr. Reed shouted angrily. This experiment is very important. If it succeeds, mankind will be free from the threat of disease. Susan added, you mutants can get sick too, and Dr. Reed's experiments will be equally useful to you. I didn't say I wouldn't let you do experiments. I will take the 5 of you and Iron Man to the space station. Mystique said, and everyone was stunned. The mutants actually wanted to go to the space station. What did they want to do? Sloane asked a little puzzled. Why bring them with you? They will only bring risks and troubles. Mystique asked, can you operate a space station? Sloane shook his head. How could I, the leader of a killer organization, operate a space station? Even the aerospace training was completed in more than half a month. I don't know how. I have to rely on them to operate. Moreover, they are good hostages. Don't worry, they can't make waves. Mystique said. Okay, no time wasting. Misty, is it done at the console? Misty's voice came from the communicator. It's done, they are all obedient. Very good. Bring in the tungsten rods and instruments and load them onto the space shuttle. The nights are long and the dreams are many. We have to set off as soon as possible. Mystique nodded, and then she said to Tony with a smile on her face, "Old friend, do you want to try what it feels like to be tied to a rocket?" Tony gritted his teeth angrily. He knew what Mystique meant and said, "Bring Mark's suit over here and I'll unlock it for you." Clever. Mystique nodded with satisfaction, pushed Tony to Toad, and asked him to unlock the Mark suit. With Mystique's push, Tony's fingers gently touched a certain location on his waist, sending out a distress signal. This was a rescue method developed by Tony after he was captured last time, but even he himself did not expect that he would use it so soon, and it was because of the same group of people. Tony looked sad and angry. What kind of unlucky person would install a distress signal in his body, and what kind of unlucky person would really use a distress signal? Or within a year. In fact, Mystique has blocked the signal here, but Tony's rescue method is relatively advanced, and ordinary shielding devices cannot block it. Tony's signal quickly reached Pepper, who was shocked and immediately notified S.H.I.E.L.D. of the incident and hired Psylocke to help again. Psylocke complained, "Pepper, are you sure you don't want to find another man? How many times has this happened? If I don't change, I will identify with this man for the rest of my life." Pepper was also talking dirty words in her heart. She said she was fine last month, but she was immediately in danger this month. She said, "Anyway, if you rescue him for me, money is not an issue." Okay, you have the money, you have the final say. However, that base is a bit far away from me, so I may not be able to catch up. Lingdi nodded and set off again. At the same time, S.H.I.E.L.D. quickly set off, and Black Widow complained, "Is there any mistake? Is this frequency too high? When will Coulson return to New York to take charge? I miss him so much now." John Garrett sighed. He was here specifically to cover for Coulson, or rather, to suffer. Natasha said, "Let's go quickly. If something happens to the rocket base, it will be terrible." Garrett nodded, and soon, the group took a Quinjet and rushed to the rocket base outside New York. At the rocket base, a truck drove in. In addition to 10 tungsten rods, there were also some devices needed for space-based weapons. The space-based plan was not actually thought up by Mystique herself. It was an idea that Magneto had long ago. However, it has not been implemented due to some factors. Dr. Reed couldn't help but ask, "What on earth do you want to do? The space shuttle cannot transport such a heavy tungsten rod. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean we can't do it. It's weightless." Mystique shouted to a small mutant, who nodded and walked to the tungsten rod. Then, he held the tungsten rod in his hand, and a layer of black light gradually spread from his palm to the entire tungsten rod. After a moment, the pale, overexhausted little mutant let go of the tungsten rod in his hand without weight, and the black-lit tungsten rod floated in the air as if weightless. Is this controlling gravity or reducing weight? Tony was a little surprised. The abilities of mutants are really diverse, but humans are not bad either. For example, the Rebirth group has an artificial gravity system, and there is a doctor who is studying gravitonium. Dr. Reed looked at the floating tungsten rod and exclaimed, "Wow, your ability is very useful for space research. Are you interested in being my assistant?" Weightless heard the words and mocked. "Someone once made a similar request to me, and then, he almost drained my blood. We mutants are just experimental products to you humans. After today, nothing will be the same." Mystique gave Weightless encouragement, turned to Big Steel Teeth and said, "Bring the people out." Big Steel Teeth nodded silently, and took out a group of tied prisoners from the truck. All of them were die-hard supporters of Senator Kelly, and they were all killed by Mystique with poison gas. Mystique said coldly, "Make their lives weightless, weightless, make the tungsten rod and all of us weightless, thank you for your hard work." "No hard work, for the mutants," Weightless said firmly, and so did the other mutants. Then, the life-link mutant came over, his hands lit up with purple light, and transferred the life of a prisoner to Weightless. The previously sluggish Weightless suddenly became full of life. The remaining prisoners were frightened and whined, obviously begging for mercy. Unfortunately, the mutants had no intention of letting them go. After spending several months together, they knew very well the virtues of these people. If it weren't for the plan, these die-hard anti-mutants would have been killed by them long ago, and they were extremely cruel. Tony couldn't stand it anymore and asked angrily in a weak tone, "How can you kill innocent people like this? First of all, they are not innocent. Each one of them wants to exterminate us mutants. Secondly, we are much more merciful than you humans. At the very least, we only kill people, do not torture people, let alone do experiments on people." Mystique said through gritted teeth. After she killed Trask, she was captured by humans and used as an experimental subject for several years. She still shudders even when she thinks about those days when life was worse than death. This is why Mystique hates humans so much, and she really doesn't mind wiping them all out if she can. Tony was speechless. Even he was powerless against the conflict between mutants and humans. Mystique ignored Tony and said, "Big steel teeth, tie the weightless materials to the space shuttle. Toad, modify the space shuttle and get us some simple seats." Good. The mutants nodded one after another and arranged everything as quickly as possible. They were full of expectations. If they succeeded this time, they would have their own country. By then, they would no longer be discriminated against and everyone would be happy. Life. "I hope it won't affect my experiment." Dr. Reed sighed and was a little speechless. He pointed at Susan and whispered, "Reed, now is a good opportunity to gain favor." Dr. Reed's eyes lit up and he was about to go over to comfort Susan. At this time, Frank stood between him and Susan and gave him a warning. Dr. Reed smiled coquettishly and turned around to continue talking to Ben. Frank snorted and turned to Susan. "Miss Stone, you don't have anything to worry about. You are the boss's woman. No one on Earth can hurt you. I didn't expect you, with your thick eyebrows and big eyes, to be able to flatter people." Susan couldn't help laughing and said, "I hope Andrew can get here in time." Mystique heard this and said, "He was too late, because he was having a passionate fight with a beautiful woman. Let's push the time forward a little." On the streets of New York, Andrew, who was driving a convertible, stopped in front of a traffic light. "When will Howard's artificial intelligence research be completed? With artificial intelligence, you don't have to wait for the traffic light anymore. Ah, isn't this a little overqualified?" Andrew was thinking wildly. At this time, accompanied by a gust of fragrance, a hot beauty wearing only a vest and hot pants leaned against the passenger door and asked, "Handsome man, are you interested in taking me for a ride?" Andrew looked at the other person up and down and said, "This script is wrong. With your temperament, you should pretend to be chased by someone, or chase someone else, and then point a gun at my head and ask me to drive immediately." Quote. Firefox was confused. What the hell is this? Speaking of which, Firefox's initial thoughts were similar to what Andrew said, but Mystique warned her that it was very dangerous to point a gun at Andrew's head, and someone was almost killed because of this. Therefore, Huahu could only pretend to be a chat girl, and she said, "If you are interested, I can meet your special request." "Sorry, I don't like yours. Goodbye." At this time, the traffic light turned green and Andrew was about to leave. Seeing this, Firefox put her hand on the car door and jumped into the passenger seat. Then, she asked, "If you don't like my car, which one do you like?" Andrew was about to answer when explosions and gunshots suddenly came from the front. Firefox pretended to be horrified and shouted, "Run away, there is danger." It seems that they are not trying to strike up a conversation, but rather delaying my time and preventing me from going to the rocket base. Andrew understood. He looked into Firefox's eyes and said, "Let me see, what are you going to do?" Stared by Andrew's burning eyes, countless past scenes popped up in Firefox's mind. Soon, the scene came to when Mystique introduced the space-based plan to them. Space-based plan. Andrew's eyes lit up. Mystique Raven actually had such an idea. Although it is unlikely that all 10 tungsten rods will fall, there is a high possibility that 1 or 2 will fall. 1 bar means a big city. Wow, how many souls can this collect? To be honest, Andrew was a little touched. The mutants were really good people and kept sending their souls to him. People who are philanthropic will indeed have good luck. "What did you do to me?" Firefox recovered and asked Andrew in horror. Andrew said lightly, "It's nothing serious, I just looked at your memory." "Isn't this a big deal?" Hijacking asked in a mixture of shock and anger. What was on her mind? Her face changed. "Do you know our plan?" "Look here." Andrew took out his cell phone and turned on the flashlight. Firefox's expression immediately became confused. her memory was restored to the beginning, which meant that she did not remember that Andrew had read her memory. Then, Andrew thought for a moment and did not call the Daily Bugle right away. The matter would be reported later. What are you waiting for? When Mystique enters the space station, both the satellite and the space station can be shot down, so we have to wait until Mystique is ready before reporting. By then, the deal is done, and the tungsten rods can be launched at any time. Unless humans and mutants want to lose both sides, they will never dare to attack the space station. At this time, Hula-Hoo recovered from her confusion. She heard the gunfire in front of her and pretended to be horrified, shouting, "Run away, there is danger ahead." You seem to have something wrong. Andrew glanced at Firefox, started the sports car and sped forward. He still had to perform the play that was supposed to be performed, and there had to be an excuse for not arriving. In addition, Firefox and the others had made so many preparations, and they couldn't let them go to waste. Andrew, but a good devil who knows how to be considerate of others. What are you doing? It's dangerous ahead. Firefox was a little anxious, pretending to be frightened and pulled Andrew's hand. Andrew grabbed her wrist and shook it gently. The bones in Firefox's body shook one after another starting from her arm. She made a very suspicious sound and collapsed in the passenger seat. Unable to move. He really is a kung fu master. Firefox was shocked, and Andrew smiled slightly and took the initiative to help Firefox fasten her seatbelt to prevent her from flying out. Soon, Andrew came to the explosion site ahead. He took a look, quickly turned the steering wheel, and passed through the alley on the side. Oops, hurry up and catch up. When the Brotherhood saw this, they quickly sent a group of motorcyclists to chase Andrew. This group of motorcyclists are not members of the Brotherhood, they are motorcycle masters they paid to hire, and they should be able to delay Andrew for a while. Fast and furious, I wonder if there are those guys in this world. Andrew smiled. He didn't need any special abilities, just used his driving skills to play with the guys behind him. To be honest, Andrew is an experienced driver. Back in the day, he created countless tracks in hell and then used his tractor to pass the highest level of challenges. Firefox saw it in his eyes and was anxious in his heart, but couldn't do anything. Fortunately, they had arranged many means in advance, which should be able to delay it for enough time. Andrew got excited and turned the steering wheel hard to control the sports car to tilt and drift. The motorcyclist behind him had no time to turn and hit the wall one after another, with motorcycle parts flying everywhere. The news made by the Assassin Brotherhood quickly alerted the New York police, so the racing team grew again. When Andrew was catching shrimpers on the street, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Psylocke rushed to the rocket base one after another. Unfortunately, they arrived late. The rocket had already rumbled into the sky, and they could only vaguely see a shadow in the sky. Due to limited seats, some mutants did not board the space shuttle. Under the leadership of Misty, they used base researchers as hostages to confront S.H.I.E.L.D. to buy enough time for Mystique and the others. Go in and ask Mystique and the others about their purpose. Garrett cursed and led the agents to attack, but the entire base was shrouded in fog, and even they could not defeat the mutants quickly. Naturally, Lingdi didn't care about such nonsense. She looked at the rocket in the sky, called Pepper, and said, "Good news or bad news, which one do you want to hear first?" "Bad news," Pepper said. Psylocke said, "Tony was kidnapped by mutants and is now flying to the space station." Pepper looked a little ugly and asked, "What about the good news?" Psylocke said faintly, "The good news is that Tony is not tied to the rocket." "What good news is this?" Pepper almost smashed the phone, but then she thought about it. This was indeed good news, at least Tony was still alive. Pepper cursed and hurriedly met with Nick Fury and asked him to protect Tony and not attack the space station. Are there any mutants who come out every once in a while to cause trouble? Do they think humans don't hate them enough? At the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury was cursing and skillfully opening his phone. Maria Hill and other staff saw this and secretly rolled their eyes, pretending not to see it. Bugle TV was indeed broadcasting this incident live, and they broke two big news. Iron Man Tony Stark has been kidnapped again. Senator Kelly is actually Mystique Raven in disguise, and his supporters were wiped out by mutants. The live broadcast didn't say what the mutants were planning to do. It seems that the mysterious man doesn't know everything. Nick Fury was both disappointed and relieved. To be honest, that mysterious man put a lot of pressure on S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is the world's largest intelligence agency. As a result, from the director down to the employees, every day watch and get information quickly. The people in the intelligence department are a little suspicious of life. Nick Fury put the phone aside and asked Hill, "What is Andrew Wong doing?" Hill replied, "While racing in New York, judging from the situation at the scene, someone was deliberately preventing him from going to the rocket base. In addition, Andrew Wong is not only a kung fu god, a gun god, but also a car god. The people from the technical department even hacked into the New York transportation system in order to record a video of him racing. Quote, not doing his job properly." Nick Fury cursed and said, "Remember to download a copy of the video and send it to my email. I want to fully understand the strength of Andrew Wong." Hill rolled his eyes secretly and said, "Understood." Nick Fury thought for a while and asked Hill again, "Where is Professor Charles?" Hill said, "Visiting Magneto in the island prison. Tell him the news and let him find out from Magneto what Mystique wants to do." Nick Fury said, "If Magneto doesn't know, let Professor Charles go back to the Academy and use the brainwave enhancement device to control Raven." Hill nodded. "Understood." Soon, Professor Charles learned about this. He asked Magneto, who was playing chess with him, "Eric, what are you doing again?" "I don't know what's going on out there, but whatever it is, they're not wrong." Magneto said slowly, "Charles, you cannot buy the dignity and status of mutants by bowing your knees. You were wrong from the beginning." Professor Charles said angrily, "Why do you think I want to cooperate with S.H.I.E.L.D.? Isn't it because of you? Do you know what kind of situation mutants will be reduced to once the Mutant Registration Act is passed?" Magneto snorted, "If you cooperate with me, there will be no Mutant Registration Act at all, only a Human Registration Act. Eric, you are hopeless." Professor Charles controlled the wheelchair and left the prison in disappointment. He had already checked that Magneto did not know about this. At the gate of the isolated island prison, Professor Charles said to Cyclops, "Scott, send me back to the Academy. I want to use the brainwave enhancement device." Cyclops was about to nod when Professor Charles's cell phone suddenly rang. After he answered the call, Storm's solemn voice came from the speaker, "Professor, someone is targeting our college with a sniper rifle. They are taking the students on the playground as hostages. We don't dare leave the Academy to find them. They said you are not allowed to return to the Academy, otherwise they will kill all the students before you come back." Quote, Riven. Professor Charles was extremely angry. Both Eric and Raven had changed. They would do anything to achieve their goals. Professor Charles sighed, "Agree to their conditions." Cyclops was also very angry. He said, "Professor, do you want me to go back secretly?" "Scott, we can't afford the gamble." Professor Charles shook his head. At this time, his cell phone rang again. It was Nick Fury calling. "Professor, watch the live broadcast on Kuaishou. Your sister is playing bigger than anyone else this time." Professor Charles was stunned, and quickly opened TikTok and found the live broadcast of Clarion TV. This station has just received news that Mystique is preparing to use space-based weapons on the space station to attack major cities. Bugle TV not only detailed what space-based weapons are, but also selected the 10 cities most likely to be attacked. There is no doubt that the first place on the list is New York, the most disaster-friendly city. Space-based weapons. Riven, are you crazy? Professor Charles was a little desperate. After this time, humans will definitely hate mutants even more. He said to Cyclops, "Go to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters." The people of New York are more desperate than Professor Charles. Other cities can take chances, but New York cannot. This is something the people of New York know very well. Therefore, the people of New York naturally began to flee. Frank's wife looked lucky. Fortunately, she had moved to Los Angeles, otherwise she would have been as worried as the New York residents. The disaster of the world itself, coupled with the disaster caused by the butterfly storm, no wonder the Ancient One wants to let me in. Andrew secretly sighed. It was obvious that GUE wanted to find someone to take the blame together. At S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury walked to an empty room and called his Skrull friends to ask if they could return to Earth. Talos, the Skrull, said helplessly, "Fury, we are not in the solar system and there is no time to go back." Nick Fury was a little disappointed. He thought for a while and asked, "Can you send a spaceship back?" Things have been increasing in the past 2 years, and I need some help. Talos nodded. That's okay, Fury. Putting down the phone, Nick Fury smashed the table with hatred. Mutants. The world is becoming more and more dangerous. Perhaps it is time to restart research on the cosmic Rubik's Cube. Nick Fury secretly thought that the cosmic cube is an endless energy source. During World War II, the Red Skull used it to create a large number of energy weapons. The inside of the cosmic cube is actually a space gem, but the people at S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't know it. At this time, Hill knocked on the door outside. Director, the World Security Council has held an emergency meeting and requires you to arrive immediately. I'll be there right away. Nick Fury nodded. This time it is a global disaster, and the World Security Council will definitely come forward in person. I propose to launch a rocket nuclear bomb to blow up the space station. Gideon Malik, the United States representative on the World Security Council, said, although they have hostages, they can't care about that much at this time. No, Nick Fury shook his head and said, according to the intelligence, Mystique has 10 tungsten rods in her hand. There is no way to hide the launch of a nuclear bomb from her. When the time comes, she will definitely choose to kill the enemy. With our current technology, we cannot stop the tungsten rods. 10 tungsten rods. Fury, did you get the information from Kuei-do? Gideon scoffed, and then said, even if we don't launch nuclear bombs, Mystique will still throw tungsten rods. Rather than being passive when the time comes, it's better to strike preemptively. Nick Fury said, no, Mystique is not a madman. She did so much to negotiate with us, not to destroy the world. Not crazy. Do you know what she did? She killed Senator Kelly and pretended to be him for months. Gideon shouted. The president asked me to tell you that he is dissatisfied. Nick Fury, you have failed in your duty. We can wait until the disaster is over to discuss these things. Nick Fury said, I hope you will authorize me to negotiate with Mystique. Gideon asked dissatisfiedly, are you ready to give in? Nick Fury shouted in a deep voice. The key is not to surrender or not, the key is not to let the tungsten rod fall. I believe you know how terrifying the power of the rod of God is. Of course we know, so we're anxious. Another director said that at this time, Hill knocked on the door outside and said, Professor Charles is here and he said he has a way to stop this. Really? That's great. Nick Fury was overjoyed and said, Hill, you stay here to help me hold the meeting. Everyone, I will go see Professor Charles first. Are you going to put the fate of the world in the hands of another mutant? Gideon said coldly. How do you know he is not Mystique's accomplice? I think Professor Charles should be arrested first. If he was an accomplice of Mystique, we would have died long ago, Mr. Director. He is more trustworthy than most humans, including you and me. Nick Fury snorted, stopped wasting time, and went out to see Professor Charles. In the office, Nick Fury said straight to the point. Professor, the situation is very critical now. We must solve this matter as soon as possible, otherwise both humans and mutants will suffer catastrophe. I know. Professor Charles didn't talk nonsense. He said, there are 2 ways to solve this matter. One is that I use a brainwave enhancement device to control Raven and the others, but now someone is threatening my college, and I can't go back for the time being. Nick Fury asked, Professor, are a few of your students more important than tens of millions of lives? Human life cannot be measured in numbers. Professor Charles said. Also, we have other ways to deal with this without risking it. An idea popped up in Nick Fury's mind, and Professor Charles sensed it immediately. He said dissatisfiedly, Director Fury, if you really do that, I will leave immediately and ignore this matter. Fark. Nick Fury couldn't help but cursed. If the situation was not urgent, he would never meet with Professor Charles in person. He said, I give up the idea before. Professor, is there any other way to solve this thing? Quote, find the Red Devil and let him take me to the space station. Professor Charles said, after entering the space station, I will control everyone as soon as possible. By then, the crisis will naturally be resolved. Nick Fury's eyes lit up and he asked, Red Devil, that mutant who can teleport. Can he teleport to the space station? He can teleport all over the Earth, and he should be able to teleport to the space station. Professor Charles nodded. The question now is, how to catch him? He can teleport, so it is not easy to catch him. There's no need to arrest him. Let's contact the Black King directly and ask him to bring the Red Devil over. Nick Fury said. If the Black King does not agree, I will destroy the Hellfire Club. Now the whole world is standing behind me, and the Black King's network is nothing. Professor Charles was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, I was wrong. With the character of the Black King, he will definitely bring the Red Devil here to help, unless he is willing to give up everything he has now. He couldn't bear it. The so-called elite mutants are each more selfish than the last. Nick Fury sneered. Without further delay, I will call the Black King right away. Professor, you are ready at the headquarters. As soon as the Red Devil comes, you take action immediately. After a pause, Nick Fury added, don't worry, after the matter is resolved, I will try my best to eliminate the negative impact of this matter on mutants. Thank you. Professor Charles nodded, his heart filled with exhaustion. When will these days end? Every time he took a small step forward, the Brotherhood of Mutants pulled him back a giant step. Human beings are certainly responsible for the situation that mutants are in today, and extreme mutants are also responsible. In the Hellfire Club, the Black King knew that the stakes were high and did not refuse Nick Fury's request. However, he took the opportunity to put forward a bunch of conditions. Nick Fury said, I can agree to all these conditions, but you must bring the Red Devil over. If you break your promise, I will destroy the Hellfire Club. Don't worry, the Red Devil will be here soon. The Black King, dressed like a high-class gentleman, smiled, and then he called the Red Devil and asked him to go back to the Hellfire Club to discuss something. I'm very busy right now. If you need anything, just call me. While playing cards with Feng Mo, the Red Devil said, there is nothing more important than pleasing your boss. It's a very important thing. You can talk about it first when you come back. The Black King said with some dissatisfaction that in the past few months, the Red Devil had only returned to the club a handful of times, and he ignored his orders. It was obvious that this guy had other intentions. The Red Devil said, okay, I'll be back after finishing this fight. Are you playing cards? The Black King was almost furious. Would you rather play cards than come back to see your boss? What do you think the boss is? The Red Devil put down the phone indifferently. The boss he was following now was the Demon King of Hell. He was just a Black King. What the hell? The Red Devil said, Boss, I will go back to deal with the Black King first, and I will come back later to play cards with you. Feng Mo said, Go, don't be anxious, we are just looking for someone to give you a massage. In order to pursue performance, we have not enjoyed it during this period of time. The Water Demon and the Earth Demon nodded in agreement. There is one thing in this world that is more terrifying than the devil, and that is the pursuit of performance. Looks like I'll be back later. The Red Devil laughed and turned into red mist and disappeared. At the Hellfire Club in the casino, the Red Devil appeared out of thin air in front of the Black King and asked, Black King, what's the matter? Of course it's a big deal. The Black King told the story with a dark face, and then he said, You should go to the SHIELD headquarters immediately and save the world with Professor Charles. You want me to save the world? The Red Devil pointed at himself and asked in astonishment, Black King, when have you ever seen a savior who looks like me? Looking at the red-skinned devil in front of him, the Black King was also a little speechless. He said, Go if you are told, don't talk so much nonsense. No time, let the X-Men save the world on their own. The Red Devil flatly refused. Who has ever heard of a devil from hell saving the world? More importantly, if he takes action, he will destroy Boss's good deeds. When the time comes, Boss will definitely throw him into the volcano and impose an eternal curse on him. Red Devil, you are so brave. The Black King was already dissatisfied and shouted angrily upon hearing this. Then, a spiritual power invaded the Red Devil's mind. The Red Devil's expression changed, and he wanted to teleport away. At this moment, the spiritual power pierced his consciousness like an awl. He screamed, and his body turned into red mist and reappeared in the hall. The White Queen. The Red Devil covered his head and asked angrily, Black King, White Queen, what are you doing? The White Queen, a blonde beauty with a perfect figure wearing a pure white mink coat, walked out from behind and said in a cold voice, What are you doing? Red Devil, I should ask you this question, what exactly do you want to do? Lian He, do you dare to disobey the king's orders? So what? The Red Devil snorted coldly and used a unique skill. to complain to boss. Boss, the Black King and White Queen forced me to save the world and destroy your good deeds. Andrew was a little surprised and asked, forcing you to save the world? Who is so visionary as such that? The Red Devil recounted the matter in his mind, and expressed his loyalty. Boss, even if I die, I will not ruin your business. Andrew's eyes flashed and he said, maybe you can save the world. The Red Devil was stunned. Is the boss talking sarcastically, or did he really ask him to save the world? Red Devil, who are you communicating with? The White Queen sensed the mental fluctuations of the Red Devil and followed his consciousness to connect with Andrew's consciousness. The next second, a majestic figure appeared in the White Queen's mind, as if the whole world was in front of him. The White Queen was not even an ant. The figure noticed the White Queen's presence and lowered his head to look at her. The White Queen couldn't bear his gaze at all, and her soul almost exploded. Great being, please forgive me. The White Queen was so frightened that she knelt down and begged. She never thought that the person connected to the Red Devil's consciousness was actually a god. No wonder the Red Devil has become so arrogant. It turns out there is a back end. Andrew's voice thundered, give me your soul. The White Queen did not hesitate and said immediately, great existence, my soul, everything about me belongs to you. Very good. Andrew took back his consciousness and said at the same time, work with the Red Devil to send the Black King to hell. This order also reached the Red Devil's mind, and the Red Devil said excitedly, yes, boss. Black King Sebastian Shaw didn't know what happened in the consciousness space. He shook the red wine glass and said to the Red Devil, Red Devil, listen to my orders honestly, otherwise don't blame me for being rude. Black King, I was wrong. I will obey your order and help Professor Charles. The Red Devil lowered his head and admitted his mistake obediently. The Black King smiled proudly and said, this is the attitude you should have, Red Devil. Nick Fury has promised me many conditions. After this time, our Hellfire Club will become even better. Being powerful, your benefits will be indispensable when the time comes. The Black King was thinking about a better future. At this moment, he suddenly felt dizzy and his body lost strength. Immediately afterwards, the surroundings changed. The Red Devil did not lower his head, and the White Queen walked up to him at some point and placed a small bottle under his nose. The Black King didn't know that it was just an illusion. He endured dizziness, stood up reluctantly, and asked the White Queen angrily, Emma, what are you doing? Send you to hell. The White Queen spread her hands and said, don't blame me. If you want to blame me, just blame yourself for offending someone you shouldn't offend. The Red Devil sneered, Black King, the Hellfire Club will indeed become more powerful, but it has nothing to do with you. The Black King wanted to say something else, but the poison completely broke out, and he fell to the ground with a thud and passed out. This poisonous gas was specially prepared by the White Queen for the Black King, and came from other mutants. The Red Devil said, Tisk, White Queen, it turns out you have always had bad intentions towards the Black King. Hellfire Club, no one is worth trusting, right? The White Queen turned her finger into a diamond and said, I will send him to hell myself. Did you misunderstand something? The Red Devil hurriedly stopped the White Queen and said, when the boss said he would go to hell, he really meant going to hell, not killing him. The White Queen looked confused. Wouldn't going to hell mean killing someone? The Red Devil did not explain any more. He took the White Queen and the Black King and teleported to the rebirth hell. Then, he said to Andrew, Boss, the Black King has been brought. Send him to Trask, and Trask is going to give him a job. Andrew said. The Red Devil nodded and left with the Black King. What awaits the Black King will be a job called, being studied. To be honest, Trask was very excited about the arrival of the Black King. The Black King was not only a perfect experiment, but also a perfect target. Leaving aside the Black King for the time being, the White Queen only then knew that Andrew was a Hell Lord. She hurriedly knelt down, leaned forward slightly, and shouted, Boss. Andrew sat high on the throne and said, Get up, White Queen Emma, take control of the Hellfire Club for me. It will be useful in the future. The White Queen stood up and said respectfully, Yes, boss, the Hellfire Club and I are ready to serve you at any time. Andrew nodded. Okay. At this time, the Red Devil returned, and Andrew explained to the two of them and sent them back to the world. Hellfire Club. Just by the name, you know it's my property. Andrew smiled. now it depends on whether S.H.I.E.L.D. is willing to hand over the thing. In the Hellfire Club, the White Queen breathed a sigh of relief. She said to the Red Devil, "Red Devil, it turns out that you are already a veritable devil. You should thank me. Boss has super thick thighs, much better than Black King." The Red Devil said, "Emma, serve the boss well, and you will have everything you want, including immortality and youth." Immortal and eternal youth. There was a flash of heat in the White Queen's eyes. She spent millions on her body every year. These two things were very tempting to her. It seems that if I have to find more opportunities to meet with the boss, maybe one day I can become the Queen of Hell. The White Queen thought secretly, and then she said, "Let's not talk about this first. Let's complete the boss's mission first." In S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury received a call from the Black King. He said dissatisfiedly, "Sebastian Shaw, why hasn't the Red Devil come yet? The Black King has gone to hell, and now I'm in charge of the Hellfire Club." The White Queen's voice sounded, and Nick Fury was stunned and asked, "The White Queen? Emma, now is not the time for you to act recklessly." Professor Charles said displeased ly. He once taught the White Queen for a period of time, and the two were considered masters and apprentices. "Professor, I didn't do anything wrong." The White Queen smiled and said, "Director Fury, what the Black King promised you before still counts. However, I talked to the Red Devil and he cannot teleport to the space station unless you lend him the Cosmic Cube." Cosmic Cube. White Queen, what do you want to do? Nick Fury frowned. This was obviously just an excuse. The White Queen's real purpose was the Cosmic Cube. To be precise, it was Andrew who wanted the Cosmic Cube. In fact, he had already had ideas about the space gems. Whether this matter succeeds or fails, Andrew will not suffer any loss. If he succeeds, he will get the space gem in the universe Rubik's Cube. If he fails, he will gain a lot of souls. In addition, just because the Red Devil takes action does not mean that Professor and the others will definitely succeed. There are still variables in this matter. The White Queen said, "I'm just telling you a fact, Director Fury, don't worry, the Cosmic Cube will be returned to you immediately after use." Nick Fury naturally didn't believe it. He said coldly, "White Queen, this is a global crisis. The dignitaries you have made friends with will not protect you. What's the use of scaring me?" The White Queen, who was backstage, didn't take S.H.I.E.L.D. seriously at all. She said, "Without the Cosmic Cube, even if you break the Red Devil's legs, he won't be able to teleport to the space station." The Red Devil said next to the White Queen, "That's right, without the Cosmic Cube, I can't teleport. We are not negotiating terms with you, we are telling a fact." Nick Fury and Professor Charles both frowned. The White Queen and the Red Devil were so stubborn and refused to let go. At this time, the White Queen said again, "We have no intention of breaking our promise. If you don't agree, you can find someone else, or agree to Mystique's request." "I'm going to think about it." Nick Fury hung up the phone and said to Professor Charles, "Professor, the Cosmic Cube is very important and cannot be given to anyone casually. I think it is better to use a brainwave enhancement device. With Barton taking action himself, your students will be in almost no danger." Quote, "Director Fury, no matter how important the Cosmic Cube is, it is just a foreign object. Moreover, the Red Devil is just borrowing it for a while, and he will return it." Professor Charles shook his head repeatedly. In his heart, those students were no different from his children, and he would never let them take any risks. Nick Fury is helpless. To be honest, he doesn't want to lend the Cosmic Cube out at all. After all, the other party may not return it if he borrows it. He often does this kind of thing, ahem. At this time, Hill walked in and said, "Mystique is threatening us. Let's push the time forward a little." The space shuttle arrived at the space station smoothly. Mystique breathed a sigh of relief and left the plane with Dr. Reed and others and entered the main base of the space station. The space station has artificial gravity. Except for Mystique and others who have black lights on their bodies, others will not float. According to predictions, the cosmic storm will arrive in 10 hours. "Mystique, you promised me to allow me to conduct experiments," Dr. Reed said to Mystique, who was releasing the weightless state. In addition to the future Fantastic Four, Frank, and Mystique, those who boarded the space station were Iron Man Tony, Assassin Leader Sloan, Mutant Toad, and Big Steel. Teeth, weightless. "Don't worry, you and Tony Stark first transfer the authority of the space station to me, and teach me how to control the space station. Mystique said. Dr. Reed, Tony Stark, don't play tricks, otherwise, you will all die. I have reached this point, there is no way out, and I have no intention of retreating. Tony, who was being carried by big steel teeth, couldn't help but ask, what on earth do you want to do? Threatening humanity and establishing a country belonging to mutants, that's all. Mystique said. Don't talk nonsense, transfer the authority quickly. Dr. Reed glanced at Susan and didn't do anything more. He just helped Mystique control the space station. The same was true for Tony. He had no power to resist now. After taking complete control of the space station, Mystique led Toad and others to deploy space-based weapons. To be honest, this was not difficult because space-based weapons were very simple and relied on gravity. After all the arrangements were completed, Mystique used the communication system on Mark's suit to contact the World Security Council and state her requirements. Release all mutants. In addition, we mutants must establish our own country. This is impossible. The directors were upset. The former request was negotiable, but the latter was absolutely impossible. With the strength of the mutants, once a country was established, the entire world would be in turmoil. I'm not begging you, I'm asking you. Mystique sneered. If you don't agree. Nick Fury said. If we don't agree, you're going to bomb 10 cities with tungsten rods, right? How do you know? Mystique was stunned for a moment, then reacted and sneered. You got the news from Bugle TV, right? I heard that every employee of S.H.I.E.L.D. has Kuiju installed on their mobile phones. Can you not mention this? Nick Fury looks ugly. Have you ever heard of hitting someone without slapping him in the face? He said. Mystique, if you do this, it will only cause us humans to deal with you mutants with all our strength. What's the difference between now and what you said? Mystique sneered. The rod of God is ready. If you don't agree, the first tungsten rod will attack New York in half an hour. If you still don't agree, the remaining 9 tungsten rods will hit New York in an hour. 9 major cities around the world will be hit. The directors looked ugly, but did not dare to refuse directly. Nick Fury thought for a while and said, the time is too short for us to discuss. This is not a trivial matter. That's your business, you only have half an hour. After Mystique finished speaking, she was about to interrupt the communication. At this time, Sloane stepped forward and shouted, you still have to return the loom to me. Textile machine. Nick Fury and the World Security Council looked confused. Why would someone suddenly come out of such a serious meeting and ask for a textile machine? Is this painting style completely different from before? Gideon mocked. Is S.H.I.E.L.D. so in decline now? Are you even trying to rob other people's looms? Nick Fury thought of his actions last month and said, I remember, are you from the Assassin Brotherhood? Sloane said, yes, you must return the loom to us and promise not to interfere with our Assassin Brotherhood again in the future. We need to discuss this. Nick Fury said, if he remembered correctly, the mysterious loom seemed to have been robbed. The time left for you is running out. Mystique snorted and interrupted the communication. She looked at the people behind her with a look of confusion. How did the Daily Bugle get the news? The World Security Council also wants to know the answer to this question. Just after the negotiation, the content of the negotiation was broadcast live by Clarion TV. It's really our New York, why am I not surprised at all? New Yorkers complained and sped up to escape. The streets and alleys were full of vehicles leaving the city, and the airport was full. This shitty place in New York has great feng shui. Gideon shouted. Nick Fury, didn't you say there is a way to solve this matter? Solve it quickly. Also, find out who leaked the secret. S.H.I.E.L.D. cannot be a sieve. If you want to solve this matter, you must lend the cosmic Rubik's Cube to the Red Devil. Nick Fury explained the Red Devil's request. In fact, he had permission to use the Rubik's Cube. The reason why he applied was to get the World Security Council to take the blame. The World Security Council discussed the matter and chose to agree. Then, Nick Fury called the White Queen and said, we agreed to lend the cosmic cube. However, Emma Frost, I am here to solemnly warn you that if the Rubik's Cube is lost, the whole world will hunt you down. Director Fury, don't judge others by yourself. The White Queen snorted and said, give me your address and the Red Devil will teleport there to get the cosmic cube. Don't play tricks. We're not that stupid. Nick Fury didn't waste any time and directly reported an address. The Red Devil teleported over and got the box containing the Rubik's Cube from the person in charge. Then, the Red Devil teleported back to Hell and handed the box to Andrew respectfully. Andrew opened the box, and a blue cube shone inside. It was the cosmic Rubik's Cube. He grabbed it from the air, and the space gem flew out of the Rubik's Cube and landed on his left hand. The Red Devil was a little surprised. There was actually a gem in the Rubik's Cube. I'm afraid even S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't know about this, right? At this time, a large amount of space energy turned into blue lightning and poured into Andrew's body. The surrounding void was distorted. Andrew let out a low roar and called on the power of the devil to suppress the space gem. Soon, the space energy disappeared, and the space gem merged into Andrew's palm, officially becoming his treasure. It seems that the compatibility between me and the space gem is very high, and the space gem does not reject me. Andrew was a little excited. The space gem was the top treasure, enough to close the gap between him and the veteran lords. In other words, he was now on the same level as Mephisto. Thinking of something, Andrew looked up into the void. Ancient One did not stop him and allowed him to get the space gem. It seemed that Ancient One did not have any ill intentions towards him. What does it mean to get the space gem? Means two things. First, even if the Earth explodes, Rebirth Hell will not be affected, because the space gem is enough to protect Rebirth Hell. Second, even if there is a problem in the Little Hell, Andrew can come and go freely on the Earth, and Kamatage's formation cannot stop the space gem. What did Ancient One see in the future to indulge me like this? Andrew shook his head. No matter what Ji thought, it was definitely right to improve his strength. When he became the Lord of Hell, he no longer had to worry about anyone. Asazo, well done, you deserve a reward. Andrew clicked his fingers, and a burst of space energy rushed into the Red Devil's body. The Red Devil let out a loud roar, and his eyes glowed blue. Immediately afterwards, the Red Devil teleported crazily in the hall. Because the speed was too fast, many afterimages were even formed. His teleportation speed was several times faster than before. I can't bear this little energy. Andrew shook his head, too lazy to pay attention to the Red Devil. His big hand shook, and a ball of space energy formed a glowing counterfeit space gem. Then, Andrew sent the counterfeit gem back to the cosmic cube. With this counterfeit, the function of the cosmic cube will not be affected. Energy weapons can still be made, and interstellar portals can still be opened. In other words, the drama of aliens invading New York will not be affected, but when the energy is used up, the cosmic cube will disappear. It's just a fish's eyes, hiding the truth from the truth. Andrew nodded with satisfaction. As for whether someone would be tricked by a copycat universe Rubik's Cube, it was none of his business. At this time, the Red Devil stopped in front of Andrew and said with great gratitude, "Thank you, boss. You're welcome, work hard and you will become stronger in the future." Andrew sent the cosmic Rubik's Cube to the Red Devil and said, "Return to Earth and return the Rubik's Cube to S.H.I.E.L.D." The Red Devil was stunned. "Give it back to S.H.I.E.L.D. What's the problem? I borrowed and returned it, sir," Andrew said. The Red Devil did not dare to ask any more questions, and took the cosmic cube out of Rebirth Hell and teleported to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. After the Red Devil left, Andrew sat on the throne and carefully analyzed the space gem in his palm in order to completely master the rules of space. Only by mastering the rules of space can the power of space gems be truly unleashed. It can not only be used for teleportation and teleportation. You must know that Captain Marvel was also created by space gems. At the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, the Red Devil appeared out of thin air. Nick Fury was stunned for a moment, then roared at him, "Red Devil, where did you go just now?" It took several minutes for the Red Devil to disappear and then reappear. During these minutes, Nick Fury almost went crazy because he thought the Red Devil had run away with the cosmic cube. "Go and recharge, look at my eyes, aren't you cool?" The Red Devil pointed at his glowing eyes and said excitedly. Nick Fury looked into his eyes and said in astonishment, "Don't tell me that you borrowed the Rubik's Cube just to give yourself a pair of eyes that will blind others. I don't know what I'm doing, but I've evolved, do you understand?" The Red Devil smiled disdainfully. He put the box on the table and said, "I'll give you back the Rubik's Cube. Don't always think the worst of people. Although I look like a devil, I'm not as shameless as you." Nick Fury opened the box immediately and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that the cosmic cube was still inside. The Red Devil sneered and turned to Professor Charles. Professor, I will take you to the space station. Now I can even go to the moon, let alone the space station. No wonder you want the Tesseract. Professor Charles suddenly understood and said, take me to the space station. It's time for this farce to end. Wait, take Agent Patton with you. Nick Fury hurriedly shouted that he would not feel at ease without his own people. Barton came over with a bow and nodded to Professor Charles. Professor Charles did not object. Then, the Red Devil took the two of them and teleported to the space station at the same time. At the space station, Dr. Reed couldn't wait to ask Mystique, Mystique, can I start doing experiments? Mystique was a little speechless. She had never encountered such a persistent researcher. Even Susan couldn't help but look at Dr. Reed a few more times. These glances made Dr. Reed more confident in his judgment. As long as this experiment was successful, Susan would come back to him. Not only for the whole world, but also for my own woman. Okay, you go do the experiment. Before Mystique finished speaking, 3 people appeared out of thin air along with the red mist. When Mystique saw the shining bald head, she immediately knew something was wrong and immediately wanted to activate the space-based weapon. The controller of the space-based weapon was in her on the body, it can be controlled by voice. Unfortunately, it was too late. Following a mental wave, all the mutants present, including the assassin Sloan, all lost control of their bodies. As soon as Barton saw Mystique, he immediately raised his longbow and prepared to shoot. Professor Charles shouted, Agent Barton, she is no longer a threat. It better be so. Barton glanced at Mystique, who was unable to move, and said, Red Devil, take Mystique and the others back to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Let's talk after a rest. The Red Devil said, in fact, he doesn't really need to rest, he is just unhappy with Barton's attitude. I am an outstanding employee who has been praised by the devil himself. Why are you, an agent, dragging me down? Barton frowned, but there was nothing he could do about the Red Devil. He thought for a while, walked up to Mystique and snatched the controller away. Then, he reported the matter to Nick Fury. Nick Fury breathed a sigh of relief and said to the people at the World Security Council, it's solved, S.H.I.E.L.D. will not let you down. Thank God you're finally here. Seeing Professor Charles and Agent Patton, Tony breathed a sigh of relief and said, I want to ask, has my kidnapping been reported? This is what you care about most. Barton complained, and he said, don't worry, it has been reported. The headline is that Tony Stark has been kidnapped again. I'm so relieved. Tony cursed with a dark face, it's embarrassing again. Why are you so unlucky recently? Then, after regaining some strength, he took out his mobile phone from his arms and cracked the system of Mark's suit. At this time, Dr. Reed said, it's great that you are here, Ben. We will start the experiment right away. Everyone was speechless. You are so persistent. At this moment, suddenly, an alarm sounded from the space station. The cosmic storm is accelerating and it is expected to arrive at the space station in 3 minutes. What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this, and Tony even shouted, Reed, what's going on? Didn't you say it will take more than 9 hours for the cosmic storm to arrive? Dr. Reed hurried to the console. He checked for a while and said with sweating profusely, the system's prediction is correct. The cosmic storm will arrive soon. It's too late to do the experiment. Stop worrying about experiments, the smartest man on Earth. Tony shouted. Activate all defense measures of the space station. Dr. Reed shouted. I can't open it, the authority belongs to Mystique. Upon hearing this, Tony hurriedly shouted to Professor Charles, Professor, control Mystique to activate defensive measures. Agent Patton shouted. I don't want to stay in this place, Red Devil, take us back to Earth quickly. Good. The Red Devil stopped talking nonsense and pulled the Professor and Barton to prepare for teleportation. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned into red mist, he immediately returned to his original form. The Red Devil's face turned a little pale. Oops, the cosmic storm has caused instability in the surrounding space, and I can't teleport. What? Professor Charles's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly controlled Mystique Raven to activate defensive measures. Mystique walked to the console expressionlessly and activated defensive measures. It was less than a minute before the arrival of the cosmic storm. Everyone could even clearly see the fiery red cosmic storm, which made everyone very nervous. At this time, under the influence of the cosmic storm, several controlled mutants regained consciousness, and Mystique immediately shouted, "Activate all the staff of God." Along with Mystique's voice, the space-based weapons floating outside began to rotate. Barton was shocked and immediately stabbed the short knife at his waist into Mystique's back. Mystique screamed and fell on the console. Professor Charles was both distressed and angry. Riven, seeing that Mystique was severely injured, Toad and Big Steel Tooth immediately rushed towards Barton, and the three of them fought. "Everything I do is for mutants, long live mutants," Mystique shouted with a crazy look on her face. She released space-based weapons to destroy the center of human power, so that human beings would fall into chaos and even war. Once humans are in chaos, mutants will have the opportunity to rise and establish their own country. Dream on, you guys. Iron Man clicked on his mobile phone, and the mark box returned to the suit state. Then, the suit flew outside, and its chest lit up with a dazzling light. This was the remote control system, inspired by Ivan. The next second, a huge pulse cannon blasted from the chest of Mark's suit towards the space-based weapon. The space-based weapon was exploded on the spot. A large number of parts and tungsten rods were floating in space. However, one tungsten rod had already been activated and headed straight towards the Earth below falls. Tony cursed, but was too late to stop the tungsten rod. At this time, the cosmic storm came. He pointed a finger and controlled the suit to come back to protect himself. Because Mystique did not open all defenses, a crimson cosmic storm poured into the space station. Everyone shouted at the same time, and their bodies kept twisting and deforming like mud in the storm. "Looks like I'm lucky." Near the rocket base, Andrew, who was leaning on the sports car, saw the situation of the space station and couldn't help but whistle. The space-based weapons were still activated. Although there was only one, it was enough. Andrew was not polite and ordered the Black Widows to start working while live broadcasting the tungsten rod falling from the sky through Bugle TV. As for Andrew himself, he headed to the space station. Firefox had passed out due to excessive racing. The target of this tungsten rod is Washington, yes, not New York, but the center of power in the United States, Washington. It's over. The rod of God fell. Hey, it's not New York. The citizens of New York were about to cry out in despair, but they found that the tungsten rod was not coming towards them. To be honest, happiness came so suddenly. They couldn't believe it. Is New York finally turning a corner? The people of New York cried with joy. God finally opened his eyes. The people of New York are so pitiful and they are going to suffer another disaster. What? The rod of God is aimed at us in Washington. The mood of the citizens of Washington was exactly the opposite of that of the citizens of New York. They yelled, "Hey, God, the target is wrong, you should hit New York." At SHIELD headquarters, the directors asked Nick Fury angrily, "Is this the solution you said?" Mazefac. Nick Fury cursed, ignored these directors, and fled with Hill and a group of senior officials on a Quinjet. Over at the White House, the president boarded Air Force One with a group of senior officials early in the morning. Senior officials can escape, but citizens have no such ability. They look at the burning tungsten rods on the screen, filled with despair. At the speed of the tungsten rod, they didn't have enough time to escape the city, which meant they were dead. At this moment, the desperate citizens were pulled into the illusion. Because there were too many people, this time there was no one-to-one service, but one-to-one service. If you want to live, sign a contract and give your soul to the devil after death. Yelena said impatiently. You have 30 seconds to decide. Don't waste my time, I'm very busy now. One person couldn't help but ask, can I avoid death by signing a contract? Of course you can. The contract is very clear. After signing the contract, the Demon King will protect you. Yelena said. Those who do not sign the contract can only stay in the city and wait to die. Don't expect the missiles to knock down the tungsten rods. That is impossible. Otherwise, your president does not need to escape. There are still 10 seconds left, so decide quickly and don't wait until the expiration date. Quote. Under the threat of space-based weapons, a large number of citizens in Washington signed soul contracts. This time, Andrew was able to harvest at least hundreds of thousands of soul contracts. Washington, D.C., only has a population of over 600,000. At the space station, Andrew stood in the cosmic storm, looking a little excited. The cosmic storm that can give people superpowers, good stuff, keep it. Andrew opened a space channel, and the cosmic storm rushed into the rebirth hell. The devil raised his left hand, and the space energy formed a small space to seal the cosmic storm inside. Andrew is going to let the big boss study the cosmic storm and come up with a power enhancement device. By then, rebirth hell will have one more trump card. While diverting the cosmic storm, Andrew pulled the consciousness of most people on the space station into an illusion. But for most people, the consciousness of 4 people remained intact: Andrew, Red Devil, Frank, Iron Man, and Susan. Needless to say, the Red Devil and Frank are on their own. Iron Man is protected by his suit and has no despair in his heart. As for Susan, her whole body is filled with Andrew's energy. She is destined to go to hell in this life and does not need to do anything more. In the words of heaven, Susan has been completely defiled by the devil. Chapter 91. In the illusion, Andrew smiled at Professor Charles and said, "Professor, we meet again." Demon King. Professor Charles was stunned for a moment, then asked, "Are you here to sign a soul contract with me?" "Yes, as long as you are willing to give me your soul after death, I will help you survive the cosmic storm." Andrew said that normal people will have superpowers when they are radiated by cosmic storms, but no one knows what will happen to mutants. Andrew is not a blank wolf. Professor Charles hesitated, and after a moment, he said tiredly, "I can give you my soul, but I hope you can help me save the mutant family." "I can save mutants, but to be honest, Professor, your soul is not worth that much." Andrew shook his head and refused. Saving mutants requires a lot of thought and energy. Although the professor's soul is precious, it is not that precious. There is only one possibility for Andrew to save mutants, and that is for all mutants to give their souls to him. Hey, wait, what if I build a mutant utopia? An idea suddenly came to Andrew's mind, and he said, "Professor, make a decision. As a distinguished guest, I can give you an extra piece of news as a gift, news that is crucial to the life and death of mutants." Life or death? Okay, I'll sign. Professor Charles sighed and agreed. He was not afraid of death, but he couldn't die. The mutants needed him. Very good. Andrew nodded with satisfaction, and after Professor Charles finished signing the contract, he said, "Have you heard of Worthington Research Laboratory?" Professor Charles nodded. "I heard that Worthington is a famous pharmaceutical company in the United States. They have a mutant called Leech on their hands." Andrew explained the antidote in detail. Their goal is to develop an antidote for mutants and turn all mutants back into ordinary people. Professor Charles angrily shouted, "Mutants have no antidote and do not need an antidote." "That's what you think," Andrew said. "There is government support behind the Worthington Research Laboratory. If you do nothing, they will develop an antidote. It will be non-permanent at first and permanent later. I believe you know what will happen then." Professor Charles said firmly, "I will never allow this to happen." "That's your business, Professor. Goodbye." Andrew smiled and sent Professor Charles's consciousness back to his body. Then, with a wave of his hand, several rays of magic flew into everyone's bodies. In addition to Professor Charles, Sloane, Mystique Raven, Toad, Big Steel Tooth, Weightless, the Fantastic Three, and Hawkeye Barton also chose to sign contracts and exchange their souls after death for their survival. The harvest is good. Andrew nodded with satisfaction. At the same time, the tungsten rod was about to hit Washington. Countless citizens chose to sign soul contracts in exchange for their own survival, including a large number of SHIELD agents. The number of aircraft is limited, and many SHIELD agents have no way to escape and can only hide in underground bases. Very good. Demon King Andrew raised his left hand in hell. A space ripple flashed through. The burning tungsten rod suddenly disappeared, leaving only a line in English in the sky. "I will be back." The citizens of Washington looked at the sky in confusion. What's going on? Never mind. Also, what does it mean to come back again? Will that tungsten rod appear again? How about playing? It's just a joke, don't take it so seriously. Andrew smiled and quietly sent the accelerated tungsten rod to Mephisto Hell. He was an old friend. There were benefits. Of course he couldn't be forgotten. In Mephisto Hell, Mephisto is commanding a group of demons to beat his son Blackheart Demon, yes, beating his own son. He has been in a bad mood recently and needs to use the Blackheart Demon's screams to relieve his stress. Ji Yuyi's strength has not declined, and he is colluding with that kid, which is troublesome. Mephisto frowned. The Ancient One intercepted the Lord of Hell and the demon god outside, and the boy harvested souls inside and drove away other demon believers. The two of them cooperated, and soon there would be no place for them on the earth. What's even more troublesome is that with the strength of Ji Yuyi and that kid, a small fight is of no use to them. It has to be a big one. Mephisto thought secretly, and at this moment, a loud roar suddenly came from the west, and the terrible vibration even reached here. Mephisto was stunned, and then immediately teleported to the scene of the incident, and found that the entire city was shaking crazily, countless buildings collapsed, and countless demons died tragically. At the same time, a large high-temperature pit appeared in the middle of the city. Hot magma bubbled out crazily from the pit, but the ground was penetrated. Mephisto was furious, and with a wave of his left hand, all the demons that were not dead were transferred away. Then, he pressed down with his right hand, and the shaking of the city suddenly stopped. After solving the disaster, Mephisto clasped his hands and reversed time to view the past. The Hell Lords have great power in this hell, including controlling time. However, the degree varies. The weak ones can only see the images of the past, and the strong ones can play with the timeline at will, such as the senior Otaku Crimson Demon God. Mephisto is at a medium level. Although he cannot change the past, he can speed up and slow down time. However, he generally does not do that because it consumes too much magic power. What? Where is Andrew at? Well, regardless of this matter, we are still friends. Soon, the image of the past appeared in front of Mephisto. A burning tungsten rod fell from the sky and slammed into the Castlevania. The city turned over and collapsed like an earth dragon. This stick comes from another world, why didn't I sense the invasion? Mephisto was frightened and angry. He struggled to sense the breath on the tungsten rod. After a moment, he concluded that the stick came from the earth. There is only one truth. Mephisto solved the case in an instant. It was the Ancient One who was taking revenge on him. Only the Ancient One could invade his hell without being sensed by him. Only the Ancient One could do this with such great skill. The space gem can also do the same. As for why Ji Yuyi took revenge on him, this is completely normal, either because he called her an old woman, or because he instigated other demon kings to trouble her some time ago. Well, the former is more likely. Mephisto was very angry. It didn't matter that the city was destroyed. He rebuilt several cities every minute, but he couldn't resurrect the dead demon and suffered heavy losses. Mephisto roared angrily towards the sky. Ancient One, I'm not done with you. Taj, the Ancient One is elegantly sunbathing and drinking tea, and it's great to have someone to deal with all kinds of disasters on your behalf. At this time, Ji Yuyi sensed something. He bent his finger and knocked forward, and a muffled hum sounded. Then, the little boy outside the timeline shouted dissatisfied, Ji Yuyi, why do you keep stopping me? Franklin, this is not the timeline you're supposed to be in. Ancient One said. Go back, Dr. Reed can't fight Andrew, it's useless for you to help him. It's because that idiot can't defeat the Demon King that I have to help him. Franklin gritted his teeth and said, I shouldn't have faith in that guy. When I was 3 years old, I was better at picking up girls than he was, and I admired his talent. I almost vomited after hearing this. Ji Yuyi couldn't help but laugh, and she said, the conflict between you and the Demon King is just about being born early or being born late. If you please him, he will let you be born early. Franklin shouted, I will never please him, Ancient One, let me in, I still have a chance. Go back, it's not a shame for a son to please his father. Ancient Yi shook his head and blocked Franklin. The world was already chaotic enough, and there must be no more problems with the timeline. Thinking of something, Ji Yuyi looked up and looked outside the timeline. A large group of people were trying to break through the blockade of the time stone. She couldn't help but shake her head. Why do so many people like to travel through the timeline? Don't they know that this will cause greater disasters? An hour after the space-based disaster, a Quinjet burning with black fire flew to the space station. Immediately afterwards, Andrew walked out of the Quinjet with Natasha in a spacesuit. Why is Andrew here? Of course, it was to save the people in the space station. As for Natasha, she strongly requested to come together, and Andrew took her with him. In addition, the current version of the Quinjet uses a turbine engine and cannot go into space. It will be upgraded to a plasma engine later to have the ability to go into space. In the movie, Hulk took the Quinjet to outer space. This is why Andrew demonized the Quinjet with hellfire. What a miserable space station. Fortunately, it no longer belongs to me. Andrew looked at the dilapidated space station and smiled. Natasha shook her head and said, I hope Tony lives and feels sorry for this space station. Among superheroes, he should be the most unlucky one. He is kidnapped every now and then. You can change his name to Kidnapper in the future. While talking, the two walked into the space station and found that everyone fell to the ground, including Tony Stark in the suit. Natasha hurriedly stepped forward to check everyone. After a while, she said happily, they are all still alive. More than alive. Andrew's eyes flashed slightly. Both the Fantastic Four and the mutants had extremely strong vitality. In other words, they had all been strengthened. To be honest, Andrew is looking forward to what kind of changes Mystique and the others will have. It's not appropriate to stay here for a long time. Let's go back. Andrew picked up Susan and said to Natasha, Susan and Frank are my people. I will take them away. You can handle the rest by yourself. Although Nick Fury said that he would take everyone back, Natasha did not dare to oppose Andrew at all. She nodded and said gratefully, Thank you Mr. Wong for helping us. Then, Andrew brought everyone back to Earth via Quinjet. Pepper received the news and cried with joy. She was determined to make Tony give up being a superhero. Being a superhero is too dangerous. If Tony wants to be as powerful as Ghost Rider, Pepper will have no objection. The problem is, he is not good enough and is kidnapped every day. Soon, the Hellfire Quinjet landed at the rocket base, and a group of agents came out to help. It is worth mentioning that John Garrett did not come out. It was not that he neglected Andrew, but that he did not dare to meet Andrew. The reason is simple, Garrett is a Hydra, and Pierce has given an order that all Hydras should stay away from Andrew to prevent him from discovering the existence of Hydra. Hydra is full of fear towards Andrew, not only because he is powerful, but also because he can see through sin. Then, Andrew drove Susan and Frank back to the Rebirth group. As for Firefox, he had no interest in it and left it to S.H.I.E.L.D. for the time being. It is worth mentioning that the X-Men were also at the rocket base. They wanted to take Professor Charles back to the Mutant Academy. S.H.I.E.L.D. was reluctant and the two sides quarreled. At this time, the Red Devil woke up by coincidence. He shook his head and teleported away. The harvest this time is really good, more than 100,000 souls, soul contracts from professors, Dr. Reed and others, cosmic storms, space gems, each one is better than the last, mutants, really good people. Andrew secretly lamented that at this point, the space-based disaster incident has come to an end, but the storm it caused has just begun. People are becoming more and more hateful towards mutants, and some people are even attacking mutants on the street. This has led to more and more mutants wanting to become ordinary people, and there is not enough space in Times Square. In addition, various countries are very dissatisfied with S.H.I.E.L.D., which failed to prevent the space-based disaster. Nick Fury's status is shaky. In order to keep him, Pierce visits those high-level officials every day, and his words are almost dry. Nick Fury is very grateful to Pierce. Without him, it would have been impossible for him to become the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., let alone hold this position for more than 10 years. What Nick Fury didn't know was that Pierce had secretly scolded him bloody. If Hydra hadn't needed Nick Fury to be its chief, he would never have worked desperately for Nick Fury. Although Nick Fury is not Hydra, everything he does is more Hydra than Hydra. As for why the tungsten rod over Washington suddenly disappeared, the common theory is that a mysterious mutant took action. Because of the words he left behind, many people in Washington chose to move. President Ellis even left the White House to work elsewhere. God knows when that tungsten rod will come back. In addition to the above, there is another big thing, that is, the share price of Stark Group has collapsed again. On the one hand, the space station was destroyed and the Stark Group suffered heavy losses. On the other hand, during the transformation period, the Stark Group relied entirely on Iron Man to support its business. Now that Iron Man has been kidnapped one after another, investors have lost confidence in him, and the stock price has naturally plummeted. Pepper was so busy with this that she had to say that it was a blessing that Tony Stark could find such a good woman in his previous life. Internationally, there is a well-known arms group called the McCarran Group. At this moment, McCarran, the president of the McCarran Group, is watching the report on the space-based disaster incident. Threaten the whole world with space-based weapons. What a great idea. McCallan touched his chin and decided to make one himself. With the technology of McCallan Group, he should be able to do it. Half a month later, at a shooting range owned by the Rebirth Group, Frank held a gun with both hands and kept shooting at the target. When all the bullets were fired, he threw away the 2 guns, shook his hands, and 2 guns appeared out of thin air in his hands. Susan exclaimed, "Wow, Frank, your superpower is really cool. If you use this power for smuggling, you will definitely become a billionaire." Andrew said that Frank's special power is storage space. Although it is a bad ability in the novel, in reality, it is quite powerful. Susan complained, "You are an angel, why do you have so many criminal thoughts in your mind?" "It's just a suggestion." Andrew shrugged, and Frank turned around and said, "Money means nothing to me. I like this power. I can carry an arsenal with me in the future." "You don't care about money," Andrew said to Susan. "Fire Frank. He doesn't care about money, but he works for us. He is either greedy for your body or mine." "Nonsense." Susan hammered Andrew, and Frank couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Why don't I care about money? Is it because I follow you, the devil?" Money is nothing to Frank anymore. What he cares about is lifespan, and he wants all his family to live a long life. Andrew asked, "Susan, how are you mastering your powers?" "I have 2 powers, one is invisibility and the other is energy barrier. Among them, I have mastered energy barrier," Susan said, "but invisibility still works sometimes." Andrew touched his chin and asked in a low voice, "Like the last time you were wandering around in front of me without any clothes on, and then suddenly lost your ability?" "What did you say?" Susan blushed and spat at Andrew. Andrew smiled, took out a uniform from the side and said, "The key to controlling invisibility is emotion. In addition, this suit has been modified by the cosmic storm and can become invisible with you." This uniform was the one Susan wore on the space station. She took it over excitedly and said, "It's great. With this, you don't have to worry about losing your abilities anymore." "I think it's nice to have it fail once in a while," Andrew said. Susan rolled her eyes at Andrew. She thought of something and said, "Andrew, I want to go see Jonathan. I don't know how he is doing." At this point, Susan glared at Andrew dissatisfied. "Why don't you bring Jonathan back? S.H.I.E.L.D. can't believe it at all." "I forgot, I haven't seen your brother before." Andrew spread his hands with an innocent face. Human Torch Jonathan's ability was indeed good, but Andrew had no intention of subduing him, because that guy was a troublemaker, and Andrew had no interest in cleaning up the mess for his brother-in-law. The Human Torch should be left to S.H.I.E.L.D. I believe S.H.I.E.L.D. will be very grateful for his generosity. Susan said, "You're not too busy. Let's go. I hope he's okay, and I hope he doesn't get any superpowers. Otherwise, with his character, he will definitely get into trouble." Andrew smiled and said, "You are indeed my biological sister." S.H.I.E.L.D.'s island prison is located off the coast of New York. In addition to imprisoning criminals, it is also responsible for conducting some shady experiments, such as vampire immortality experiments, abomination research experiments, X-gene experiments, etc. Mystique and others are now all locked up in the laboratory of the island prison. Yes, it's a laboratory, not an ordinary prison, and S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to know the impact of the cosmic storm on them. For their own safety, Mystique and the others were held in separate cells, with 2 heavily armed guards standing at the door. John Garrett looked at Mystique, who was tightly tied up on the bed, and sighed, "God is really unfair. You committed such a big crime. Not only did you not die, your mutant abilities were also upgraded." The reason John Garrett is here is because Coulson finally returned to New York and he was assigned to run the island prison. "I fight for mutants, what crime do I have?" Mystique sneered. Garrett bent down, as if he wanted to get closer to talk to Mystique. At this moment, Mystique's neck suddenly lengthened, and she opened her mouth and bit Garrett's neck. This is one of Mystique's upgraded abilities, which allows her body to partially transform. Garrett was well prepared and dodged in time. Then, he pressed Mystique's head with his big hands and sneered, "Do you think I'm that stupid? Mystique, I'm warning you, don't attack the experimenters again. Otherwise, don't blame me for not giving Professor Charles face." Mystique gritted her teeth and shouted, Kill me if you can, I will never be your human experiment. Want to die? I'm sorry, you are destined to be an experiment in your life. By the way, did I tell you that Trask Industries is applying to transfer you to their side? They miss you very much. Garrett sneered and turned to leave the room. Mystique roared hysterically, but it was of no use. Outside the room, Garrett asked the doctor waiting there, is Mystique's new ability confirmed? It's almost there, the limbs are partially deformed. The doctor nodded and said, the other mutants are very uncooperative and have been hiding their abilities. We need to continue research. Then keep researching, and next, focus on other people. Garrett snorted coldly and left with the doctor. In the room, Mystique, who had been yelling, flashed a cold look in her eyes. After acting for so long, that fool Garrett finally let down his guard. Garrett, you're going to pay. Mystique secretly gritted her teeth. 2 days later, she was wearing handcuffs and anklets and being escorted by guards for experiments. On the road, she saw a short mutant wearing a light bulb helmet. This short mutant, nicknamed Scan, is a member of the Brotherhood of Mutants. He has the abilities of mental scanning and mental communication. S.H.I.E.L.D. is very interested in his abilities and has been studying him. As for the helmet on the scanning head, it is a special device. Once the scanning uses mental power, the light bulb on the helmet will glow. Seeing Mystique, Scan nodded to her. The guard behind him pushed him hard and cursed, "Get away, monster." Although Scan was angry, he didn't dare to resist. Mystique saw this and hit Scan hard with her shoulder when he passed by her, and at the same time cursed, "Trash." Be honest. The guard electrocuted Mystique. Although Mystique screamed, she had no intention of surrendering. Then, she resisted the experiment as usual. No one knew that her goal had been achieved. At night, Mystique, who was injured, wrapped herself in a sheet. Then, her body fluctuated and turned into a scanned image. Successful. Mental scan. Mystique activated her powers, and the situation in the entire island prison was reflected in her mind, including Magneto in the plastic glass room. She was overjoyed and used her mental power to contact Magneto. "Eric, I'm here." Magneto, who was playing chess with himself, was stunned. He asked with his consciousness, "Riven, why can you communicate with me mentally?" Mystique said proudly, "The cosmic storm has strengthened my abilities. Not only can I control the deformation of my limbs, but I can also copy other people's X genes. However, I have to come into contact with the other party, and I can only record one type of X gene. If I change it to another type, the previously recorded X gene will disappear." Quote. While communicating with Magneto, Mystique also brought the spirits of Toad and Big Teeth into the group chat. After hearing what Mystique said, Toad was very excited. "Great, we can finally get revenge." "Ah, Raven, why did you bring Big Steel Fang in? He has no brains." "I'm used to it. In the past, there were always 4 of us in meetings." Mystique smiled, and at this moment, Big Steel Tooth suddenly said, "Who do you think has no brain?" "I'm fine, Magneto, thank you for taking care of me all these years." The voice of Big Steel Tooth, or Saber-Tooth Tiger, is filled with deep resentment. Over the years, Magneto has used him frequently. Saber-Tooth Tiger is Wolverine's half-brother, and his brain was damaged due to some things. Magneto said, "You're welcome, I should do it. Congratulations on your return to normal." Saber-Tooth Tiger was furious. He was about to say something when Mystique said, "Don't argue. The most important thing for us now are 2 things, escaping from the island prison and letting me get in touch with Charles." "Contact Charles." Magneto was stunned for a moment, then asked in surprise, "Riven, what do you mean?" "Yes, I want to finish what Charles should have done long ago." Mystique said, "Eric, do you have any objection?" "Of course not. I've been waiting for this day for a long time." Magneto said excitedly, "Riven, tell me all the information you know, and I will make a plan." "Okay, with the ability to scan, it won't be difficult for us to escape." Mystique nodded and said, "There are many mutants in the island prison, and more importantly, S.H.I.E.L.D. has no way to limit the abilities of mutants." "Very good." Toad looked excited, not only for being able to escape from here, but also for Mystique's new plan. "I'm not interested in joining you. I'm no longer the fool who let you do what you did before." The saber-toothed tiger snorted coldly. He had no interest in exterminating mankind. He only wanted to do one thing now, and that was to have fun with his brother and express the warm brotherly love with his claws and knives. Big Ganya, without us, you can't escape from this prison. Magneto said. We help you get out of prison, and you help us complete our plan. From now on, we will owe nothing to each other. You can do whatever you want, how about it? Sabretooth thought for a while, nodded and said, okay, let's help each other, Jimmy is an X-Men now anyway. Very good. Magneto nodded, and then Mystique told Magneto the details of the island prison. After hearing this, Magneto quickly formulated a plan. After discussing with Magneto, Mystique took back her mental power. She gritted her teeth and thought, I hate it when others experiment on me. All the experimenters in the island prison will die. No one knew that the second half of the space-based disaster was about to begin. At this time, Andrew was driving Susan to a hospital in S.H.I.E.L.D., but halfway, they received some bad news. Ben and the others were not in the hospital, they were fighting Spider-Man and Spider-Woman on the street. The cause of the matter starts with Ben. Unlike the other three heroes, Ben is rather sad, he turned into a stone man weighing hundreds of kilograms. He could not accept his change at all and escaped from the hospital to seek comfort from his fiancée. Then, the fiancée called the police. Are you kidding me? A stone man weighing several hundred kilograms comes out of nowhere and says he is your fiancé. If it were you, you would call the police. Facing the police, Ben was very angry. I want you to take care of my fiancé when I see him. So, a conflict broke out, and then Spider-Man came to help and used spider silk to make the thing fall down. Dr. Reed and the Human Torch who arrived saw this and immediately stopped Spider-Man. The Human Torch had just gained superpowers and was very arrogant. He wanted to compete with Spider-Man, so the conflict expanded and the two sides fought. Spider-Woman and Jessica Jones happened to be passing by. They had a relationship with Spider-Man and immediately helped Spider-Man deal with the Fantastic Three. My girlfriend fights another girlfriend's brother-in-law. Who wrote this script? Come out and I promise not to beat you to death. Andrew was speechless. When Susan saw the live broadcast on Kuaishou, she hurriedly said, Andrew, hurry over and don't let them continue to fight. Sit tight. Andrew did not refuse and headed towards the conflict site at full speed. At the same time, he quietly sent a message to Director George. This message was detailed information about the Fantastic Three. After reading it, Director George was overjoyed and immediately dispatched a helicopter to the scene of the conflict. Director George was crazy to want a supernatural policeman. In the opinion of Director George, Dr. Reed, Human Torch, and Ben are all suitable to be extraordinary police officers, and he will go there to recruit them personally. The battle is continuing at the door of Stone Man Ben's house. Jessica punched Dr. Reed hard and hard. Dr. Reed's body sank and then rebounded. Jessica was thrown back on the spot. Jessica cursed. Your ability is disgusting, just like yours. Hey, you are suspected of personal assault. Dr. Reed was very dissatisfied. He didn't want to fight this battle, but it was obvious that Jessica didn't think so. She wanted to arrest these three weird guys. Spider-Man faced Ben the Stone. The Stone Man was too clumsy and couldn't keep up with Spider-Man's speed. He cursed and picked up something next to him and hit Spider-Man. Stop smashing it. The police station will accuse me of vandalizing public property again. It's obviously you criminals who did the vandalism, okay. The chatty Spider-Man yelled, and his words made the thing even more angry, and he picked up a car and threw it at Spider-Man. Wow, you're so strong. Well, you're in trouble. This car is a Mercedes-Benz and you have to pay a lot of money. Spider-Man continued to talk while running away. The onlookers were speechless. Can't you be more neat when you deal with criminals? Just like Spider-Woman, she never causes trouble to the City Hall or the police. Spider-Woman Gwen faced off against Jonathan the Human Torch. Because she was caught in a spider web, the Human Torch turned into a full-body flame form. The spider web was burned on the spot and the road was melted. At this time, the Human Torch had not yet learned how to use flames to fly, so he proudly said to Gwen, "Have you seen how powerful I am?" Gwen, dressed in a black and white spider suit, asked, "Do you know what is the biggest difference between humans and animals?" Human Torch said arrogantly, "The biggest difference is that humans have handsome guys, like me." The answer is, people use tools. Gwen kicked open the fire hose next to her, then stepped on the water column. The water column changed direction and sprayed onto Human Torch. Human Torch was blown away on the spot. The flames on his body were quickly extinguished, and a large amount of water vapor appeared next to him. The Human Torch was not wearing a uniform this time, and his clothes were burned by the previous flames. At this moment, the flames disappeared, and he was lying naked on the ground. Wow! A group of onlookers frantically took pictures of the Human Torch. The Human Torch was a handsome guy who looked like the illegitimate son of Captain America. The only flaw was that his figure was not as good as that of the captain. What kind of bad ability is this? Gwen quickly looked away, and at this moment, Sky's voice sounded from the earphones. Gwen, Director George is coming this way. What? Gwen was shocked and immediately chose to leave. She didn't dare to meet George. You know, George hated Spider-Man very much, hated both of them. Jessica saw this and left with her. Anyway, the matter was almost resolved. God, nothing has gone well lately. Dr. Reed cursed, took off his clothes and covered the Human Torch. There were boos all around. Seeing that the Human Torch had made a big ugly appearance, the thing was not in the mood to cause trouble again, and sat down on the ground with a thud, looking annoyed. Just as Spider-Man was trying to comfort him, Andrew's sports car and Director George's helicopter arrived one after another. Whether it was Andrew or Director George, Spider-Man was a little scared and ran away immediately. Then, Dr. Reed and the other three were brought back to the police station by Chief George. Susan felt sorry for her brother and went to the police station with them to bail him out. In the New York Police Department, Ben's fiancée placed the engagement ring in front of him and said with tears, "I'm sorry, Ben, I really can't accept it." After saying that, his fiancée turned around and ran away. The Stone Man was so desperate that he not only turned into this ghostly appearance, but even his fiancée ran away. Dr. Reed comforted, "Ben, I will definitely find a way to change you back." "Really, Reed?" The Stone Man seemed to be grabbing the last straw and shouted excitedly. The Thunderbolt, who had changed into a bathrobe, said angrily, "I don't want to change back. I'm so capable." As soon as the Human Torch finished speaking, Susan raised his ears. Then, Susan pulled the Human Torch aside and scolded loudly, "Do you think having superpowers is great? No matter how powerful you are, can you be as powerful as Iron Man? I've been kidnapped twice. Iron Man is hacked every day." Andrew complained. At this time, Coulson, who had been away for a long time, came to the police station to bail Dr. Reed and the others. It was obvious that S.H.I.E.L.D. was interested in the Fantastic Three. Although Director George was unwilling to do so, he still had no choice but to let Dr. Reed and the others go. He sighed, when will the police department have its own super warrior? At this time, Andrew's voice sounded next to Director George. "Director George, have you ever thought about turning Spider-Man and the others into vigilantes? This way you can communicate with each other and better protect New York." Mr. Wong. Director George recognized this big benefactor who had always supported him and said, "They are criminals, not vigilantes. It's you who treat them as criminals, and they become criminals." Andrew said, "Essentially, they are just a few passionate young people who, if someone is willing to guide them, will become the patron saints of New York citizens." Director George said unconvinced, "The patron saint of New York citizens is our police. Also, Spider-Man is unreliable. He has destroyed dozens of public properties this month. By the way, today is only the third day." Andrew smiled and asked, "If that's the case, why are you desperately looking for super warriors?" Director George was speechless. He said stubbornly, "New York cannot invite unknown people to be vigilantes. If they want to be vigilantes, they must take off their hoods first. It's dangerous for them to reveal their identity. Not everyone is as rich and powerful as Tony Stark." Andrew said, "However, there is no workaround. They can tell their identity to a trustworthy person, such as Iron Man, so that if something happens in the future, the police station can ask Iron Man to reveal their identity." Director George's eyes lit up. Could this be possible? In addition, after allowing them to serve as vigilantes, the police department can establish a foundation to receive donations from all walks of life to make up for the losses they have caused. Andrew continued, "You can also entrust manufacturers to sell their peripherals. Donations, merch." Director George was surprised. No wonder he could become a billionaire at such a young age. It was really unusual. If he had a brain like his, he wouldn't have no money to buy a bigger house. However, there are two things I want to remind you first. First, you and the Vigilantes are in a cooperative relationship, not superiors and subordinates. Don't think about ordering them. You should guide them. Andrew said. Second, commercialization should be limited and should not go too far. Once the degree of commercialization is too high, superheroes will inevitably deteriorate. Being a superhero is never about making money. Director George said gratefully. Mr. Wong, thank you for your proposal, I will seriously consider it. Andrew nodded, turned and left. He said all this to improve the relationship between Spider-Woman and Director George, so as to avoid any father-daughter antagonism drama in the future. It would be too boring. I'm such a good boyfriend, he's so considerate. At this time, Susan came over angrily and said, that guy Jonathan left with the people from S.H.I.E.L.D. That Coulson is smiling, and you can tell at a glance that he is not a good person. Coulson is going to cry. Andrew smiled and said, Susan, this is a good thing. S.H.I.E.L.D. has enough strength to help Jonathan clean up the mess. Jonathan is a smart kid. If he hits the wall a few more times, he will mature. I'm afraid he'll be hit and killed, Susan said angrily, and Andrew smiled and said, don't worry, he won't die that easily. There is an old saying in the East that disaster will last for thousands of years. Susan gave Andrew a roll of her eyes and said, are you scolding my brother? Andrew didn't answer. He mentioned another thing. Susan, the money earned from Stark Group has been transferred back to Rebirth Group. You should work harder recently to completely take down Hammer Industries. With enough funds, it will definitely be no problem to acquire Hammer Industries. You are really a win-win this time. Susan nodded first, and then asked a little confused, by the way, now that I have superpowers, why is my life still the same as before? Logically speaking, shouldn't I be a superhero and maintain world peace? Andrew laughed. Being a superhero. Susan, if you encounter any disaster, I think it would be better for you to call me. Susan actually wanted to be a superhero. She said a little reluctantly. That's true, but in this case, what's the point of getting superpowers? Being a female CEO doesn't require invisibility, let alone an energy barrier. Well, actually I can also become invisible. We can try it. Roll. At the S.H.I.E.L.D. New York branch, Coulson extended his hand to Dr. Reed with a smile on his face. Welcome to S.H.I.E.L.D. I didn't join S.H.I.E.L.D., I just cooperated with you. Dr. Reed corrected that if he had a choice, he actually didn't want to have anything to do with a spy agency like S.H.I.E.L.D. The problem was that he had no choice because he was bankrupt again. The Cosmic Storm project was Reed's own project, and Stark Group only invested in it. This time, the project completely failed. Dr. Reed's company went bankrupt, and even the laboratory was almost evacuated. In order to save the company and change Ben back to his original appearance, Dr. Reed can only accept funding from S.H.I.E.L.D. and become a partner of S.H.I.E.L.D. Why am I so unlucky? Dr. Reed didn't know how many times he had wailed like this. This time, he not only lost his company, but also Susan. It's the same, Dr. Reed, your abilities need to be trained. I will send professional agents over to train you. Coulson smiled and said that since they are partners, it means that they can ask Dr. Reed and others for help in the future. In other words, S.H.I.E.L.D's strength has grown again. The Stone Man shouted. We don't need to train, we just need to change back. That's you. I'm happy to be trained. I feel like I have a lot of potential. I'll be the next Ghost Rider. He's super cool. The Human Torch said excitedly. Seeing that the Human Torch and the Thing were about to quarrel, Dr. Reed hurriedly broke up the fight. Coulson secretly shook his head. Their abilities were good, but they were still a long way from being real superheroes. At the Malibu villa, Pepper shouted to Tony, who had just returned from the hospital, Tony Stark, you must give up being a superhero. You have been in danger several times. I often encountered danger before because I was too weak before, and I won't be anymore. Tony said. Everyone thinks that I have no mutation due to the protection of the suit. They are wrong. I, Tony Stark, also have superpowers. Pepper was stunned. You also have superpowers. What superpowers? Tony said proudly. I have endless energy, which means I can work 24 hours a day without sleeping. What use does this overtime ability have in combat? Pepper gushed. will it stop you from being kidnapped? Overtime power. Tony's face was a little dark, and he said, of course, my most important thing is wisdom. Being able to work endlessly means that the steel suit will be updated at an unprecedented speed. It won't be long before I can defeat all enemies. After a pause, Tony said to Pepper with a little excitement, Pepper, you have endless energy and you will never get tired. What's that expression on your face? Hey, wait, endless energy. This power seems pretty good. Pepper thought of something, her eyes lit up, and then she rolled her eyes at Tony, not serious at all. Pepper said, Tony, let's make a deal. If you are kidnapped again and your life is in danger again, you will give up being a superhero. Well, how about 3 times? Well, there will never be a next time. Tony chose to agree, and Pepper breathed a sigh of relief. She said, let's talk about the company now. The company's situation has not been very good recently. Someone on the board of directors suggested selling the weapons research and development department. It is not needed now anyway. Absolutely not. The weapons research and development department was left to me by Howard. I don't want to be a spendthrift. Tony shook his head repeatedly, and Pepper said, Tony, we need some ways to stabilize the stock price. Little things. Tony said confidently. I am ready to sell a steel suit to the military and reach other cooperation with the military. In this way, our stock price will recover. Pepper was stunned. Are you willing to sell your battle clothes? Sold to Rhodes, I gave him a war machine. Tony said. The world is getting more and more dangerous, and I need some help. If this is the case, there is indeed no need to sell the weapons research and development department. Tony, I will take care of this matter. Pepper said enthusiastically. At this time, she thought of something and reminded, Tony, don't invest in Dr. Reed. Someone told me that no one who invests in Dr. Reed will end well. This is the original rebirth. That's why the group didn't invest in Dr. Reed. Little Pepper, when did you become so unscientific? The rebirth group, well, that guy from the rebirth group is very unscientific. Tony said. In short, I don't believe this. Although the losses were heavy this time, and even the space station was completely destroyed, if there is an opportunity in the future, I will continue to invest in Dr. Reed. Even angels appeared. Isn't it normal for destiny to exist? Pepper said. It is said that S.H.I.E.L.D. is preparing to invest in Dr. Reed. Let's take a look first. 3 days later, at night, the island prison. John Garrett came outside Mystique's room and asked, Mystique, are you looking for me? Yes, I'm looking for you. Mystique, who was still tightly bound, said to Garrett, John Garrett, I came to you to thank you for taking care of me for so many days. Garrett was keenly aware that something was wrong. He put his hand on the gun at his waist and sneered, just you. Mystique, don't force me to torture you. Not by me, but by Magneto. Mystique sneered, and Garrett was shocked. Did something happen to Magneto? At this moment, the guard's horrified shout came from the communicator, Magneto has broken out of the glass prison. That's right, Magneto came out of the glass and plastic room. How did he come out? Very simple, use an iron bookmark. There is a mutant in the island prison whose ability is to transform matter, for example, turning stones into gold. However, this can only last for 2 hours. He was arrested by S.H.I.E.L.D. for using fake gold to defraud. Mystique reached cooperation with the Deception Mutant through spiritual communication. When the Deception Mutant was eating, he secretly pocketed the discarded iron pieces given to him by others. Then, the deceived mutant went to the library, turned the discarded iron pieces into paper bookmarks and stuck them in a certain book. This book will be sent to Magneto in an hour. Maybe someone is surprised. Why can mutants move freely in the island prison and read books in the library? The reason is simple. Professor Charles fought for them. The professor couldn't bear to see mutants kept in prison and asked S.H.I.E.L.D. to give them some freedom and entertainment. S.H.I.E.L.D. needed the help of the X-Men, so they did not refuse the professor's request. They changed the island prison into a general area and a felon area. The felon area houses mutants who have committed more serious crimes and have relatively powerful abilities. They have no time for activities and have been kept in prison. Even their meals are specially brought to them by guards. Criminals in the general area are relatively free. They can eat together, chat, play chess, go to the library to read, etc. These are activities that are not strenuous and occupy a small area. Of course, this is the only limit. The island prison is different from the ordinary prison. The benefits of the ordinary prison are not available here at all. Magneto flipped through the book in the cell for a while, and the bookmark turned into a scrap of iron, and then the killing began. Garrett shouted in shock and anger. Disconnect the plastic corridor immediately, sink the glass prison to the bottom of the sea, and also send an alert to S.H.I.E.L.D., the highest level alert. Just as the guard was about to press the button, an iron piece shot through the glass door and went into his head. He fell down with an expression of disbelief. Several other guards turned around and tried to escape. At this time, pieces of iron flew out and cut their throats. Immediately afterwards, the iron piece shattered the plastic door, and Magneto strode into the island prison. The entire prison shook at the same time, seeming to be afraid of his arrival. Ah! The screams in the communicator made Garrett feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. As he fled towards the tarmac, he shouted loudly, "Magneto escapes and activates the self-destruction device." Because the prison is full of felons and mutants, and there are many shady things going on, S.H.I.E.L.D. has installed a self-destruct device in the prison. Once activated, the entire prison will sink to the bottom of the sea. At this moment, there was movement from behind. Garrett turned around and saw that the iron door outside Mystique's room was forcibly removed by a force. Then, the iron door banged twice and the two guards flew away, pressing towards Garrett. Although Garrett tried his best to avoid it, he was still hit hard by the iron door and fell to the ground. Then, Mystique walked out of the room, stepped on the iron door with her foot, and said to Garrett with a smile on her face, "I'll do it." "Thank you, Garrett." Garrett's heart sank. He knew that he was finished. At the same time, in the secret room, two guards were preparing to activate the self-destruction device. Suddenly, the iron wire next to them wrapped around their necks and hung them high. Magneto smiled disdainfully. In this metal prison, he was God. It is worth mentioning that the reason Magneto can control metal outside his sight so accurately is because the scan is helping him, projecting the situation in the prison into Magneto's mind. "My fellow citizens, you are free." Magneto raised his hands, and a large number of prison iron doors were destroyed. Mutant prisoners and felons rushed out of the prison, excitedly rushing towards the guards. Toad threw a guard to the ground, opened his mouth and sprayed acid all over his face. Then, he shouted ferociously at the screaming guard, "I told you, you will die badly." The saber-toothed tiger knocked a guard away with one punch and shouted excitedly, full of joy. The same was true for the other mutants. During this period, they were often taken care of by the guards. Sloane grabbed one of the guards' guns, and with a bang, the bullet streaked across a semicircle in the air, taking away the lives of the three guards. The entire island prison was in chaos. Facing mutant prisoners with various abilities and various felons, the guards were no match at all. Many guards were ready to escape, but whether they were submarines or planes, they were all controlled by Magneto from the air. The isolated island prison was completely destroyed in a short period of time, and thousands of felons and mutants regained their freedom. At S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury received an alert from the island prison and couldn't help but curse, "Why did something happen again?" If there is no Magneto in the isolated island prison, then this matter can be easily solved. At worst, the missiles will be launched to sink the isolated island prison. The problem is that Magneto is there, which means that neither missiles nor nuclear bombs are useless. Nick Fury was thinking about countermeasures. At this time, Pierce called. He was exhausted and said, "Fury, we must not let the people in the island prison escape, otherwise, even I won't be able to protect you this time." "I know I'm going to stop them." Nick Fury nodded gloomily. Then, he called Coulson and ordered, "Take the Avengers, Dr. Reed and the others to the island prison. We must not allow Magneto and others to successfully escape from prison." "Yes, Director, I will summon everyone right away." Coulson immediately agreed, and then he began to summon the Avengers and Dr. Reed. After ordering Coulson, Nick Fury called Professor Charles and asked him to help. However, contrary to his expectations, Professor Charles did not agree immediately, but remained silent for a while. Nick Fury had a sudden thought and asked, "Professor, is there something wrong?" Professor Charles asked, "Director Fury, do you know about the mutant antidote plan?" Nick Fury instantly understood what the problem was, and he cursed in his mind, "What are the government people doing, so that such a confidential matter can be leaked?" Professor, I do know about this matter, but it is not controlled by S.H.I.E.L.D. I am only aware of it. Nick Fury said. In addition, the government does not want to exterminate mutants, they just want to have weapons to fight mutants, and they will only use antidotes on mutant criminals. Professor Charles asked. Director Fury, if you were a mutant, would you allow such an antidote to exist? Nick Fury was silent. After a moment, he said, Professor, deal with Magneto and the others first. Afterwards, I will help you apply to the president to suspend the antidote plan. Professor Charles said, I hope the Worthington laboratory will give us the leech. He is just a child and should not be in the laboratory. How useless are those guys? They even leak the name of the laboratory. Nick Fury cursed secretly and said, Professor, I will try my best to help you solve this matter. The premise is to prevent Magneto from escaping from prison. Otherwise, nothing I say will be of any use. This time, I will help, but next time, I may not. Professor Charles said that Nick Fury put down his phone and looked a little solemn. Professor Charles's meaning was obvious. If he could not solve the matter afterwards, the X-Men would cease cooperation with S.H.I.E.L.D. At the Mutant Academy, Wolverine said unhappily, Professor, you are too soft. We should force them to hand over the leeches to us, or we can directly attack the Worthington laboratory and snatch the child back. Logan, for the first time, I agree with you. Cyclops said, and Wolverine rolled his eyes, not bothering to pay attention to the guy. The professor shook his head and said, it's not good to be too tough. You have to give humans a chance. The problem is, humans won't necessarily give us a chance. Beast Hank said, the antidote must never appear. With mankind's hatred of mutants, the government is likely to force all mutants to become ordinary people. Deal with Eric and the others first before talking about anything else. We can't let them cause trouble anymore. Professor Charles sighed and controlled the wheelchair to go to the room where the brainwave intensifier was. Soon, Professor Charles put on a brainwave enhancement device, but to his surprise, the island prison only had one consciousness, a group consciousness composed of thousands of people. Spiritual connection. Can you actually connect so many people? Professor Charles reluctantly took off the brainwave enhancement device. The consciousnesses of so many people were connected together. Even he could not accurately control someone unless he was face to face with that person. While the brainwave intensifier amplified Professor Charles's brainwaves, it significantly reduced his control. Then, Professor Charles told Nick Fury the situation and said, I will lead the X-Men to the island prison to prevent Magneto from escaping. Sorry to bother you. Nick Fury was a little disappointed. At this time, Hill walked in with a tablet and said hurriedly, Magneto is not planning to escape. He is planning to lead the prisoners to attack New York. This is a picture taken by a satellite. Attack New York. Magneto, what do you want to do? Nick Fury was shocked. He glanced at the satellite image and hurriedly called Coulson and said, change the plan and set up defenses in the Brooklyn dock area. Magneto is preparing to attack New York. Attack New York. Coulson was also surprised. He hurriedly said, I will have the agents and superheroes prepare and wait for the arrival of Magneto and the others in the dock area. Nick Fury ordered. No matter what, they must be stopped at the dock and they cannot be allowed to enter the city. Clear. Coulson nodded. He touched the remaining hair with a melancholy look on his face. No wonder Garrett was so happy when he came back. New York is really a terrible place. Let's move forward in time a little, to Island Prison. Magneto walked into the room with the scan. He looked at Mystique, who was torturing Garrett, and said, kill him directly. There is no need to waste time on him. Mystique said bitterly. He reminds me of the years I was tortured by Trask Industries. Humans deserve to die. Magneto raised his hand, and a steel instrument flew out of Garrett's abdomen. Garrett screamed, and he stretched out his hand and shouted in horror, no, give it back to me. Garrett suffered severe abdominal injuries in his early years. In order to survive, he turned to Hydra, which transformed him into a death warrior and used steel instruments to maintain his life. Without this instrument, Garrett would die soon. You just stay here to die, Garrett. Mystique snorted and followed Magneto out of the room. Magneto raised his hand and the door slammed shut, leaving only Garrett's desperate scream in the room. This bad breath is finally gone. Mystique exhaled. She thought of something and said to Scan, Scan, let's join forces to connect everyone's consciousness. With Charles's character, he will definitely help S.H.I.E.L.D. deal with us. Scan said hesitantly. There are so many people, I may not be able to do it. I will help you, and besides, someone will help us. Mystique turned into a scanning form and said with a smile. At the same time, Toad, Sabertooth Tiger, and Lifelink mutants came over with a group of captives. Then, Mystique and Scan joined forces to connect the consciousnesses of everyone in the prison and form a large group consciousness. With it, not even Charles could control them. Magneto nodded with satisfaction. He had already thought out all the plans before taking action. He was not an impulsive person. Speaking of which, Magneto misses his helmet a little bit and wonders where S.H.I.E.L.D. put it. After eliminating the professor's threat, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Mystique asked the Scan to maintain group consciousness and returned to her original appearance. Then, Mystique of the Magneto dynasty said, "Contact the Red Devil and ask him to come over. His abilities are very useful." Mystique found the phone from the broadcast room and dialed the Red Devil. She said, "Asazo, come here and save me. I will tell you the whereabouts of that child. Ruiwan, you are really capable. You can even make phone calls in Lonely Island prison." The Red Devil was a little surprised and teleported to Mystique. As soon as he appeared, he saw Magneto raise his hand. The expression of the Red Devil in the red mist state changed and he disappeared immediately. Magneto was a little shocked. When did the Red Devil's teleportation speed become so fast? "Riven, are you plotting against me? You will pay the price." The Red Devil threw away the phone in anger. Fortunately, his strength had greatly increased recently, otherwise he would have been tricked by Mystique and Magneto this time. "There is no need to look for my son in the future. If you follow the Demon King, you will be able to rescue your own people sooner or later. The Demon King is super powerful. My current strength is at least several times stronger than before." The Red Devil thought of something, picked up the phone and called Andrew, saying, "Boss, Mystique, Magneto and the others are preparing to cause trouble again." So diligent. Andrew was a little surprised, and immediately turned his attention to the isolated island prison, and found that the entire prison had been controlled by mutants and felons, and S.H.I.E.L.D. staff were either captured or killed. At the same time, Andrew also discovered the clairvoyant John Garrett. He was about to die, but his will was very strong and he kept gritting his teeth to hold on. He didn't want to die. He had been holding on for decades and would continue to hold on. "It's interesting. It's time to plant a nail in S.H.I.E.L.D. Andrew pulled Garrett into the illusion and said, "Sign a contract and give me your soul, and I will protect you from death." "I'll sign." Garrett didn't waste any time and signed the contract immediately. Then, Andrew teleported him to Ethan's laboratory in the rebirth hell. "Ethan, come to life." Andrew said. "Get him a mechanical gut and let him live." "Why is it a mechanical viscera again?" Garrett was dumbfounded. Is there something wrong with this style of painting? In fact, Garrett is ready to be transformed into a demon. Ethan checked some of Garrett's wounds and said hesitantly, "The mechanical viscera is still in the experimental stage. It is a bit difficult for him and may not succeed." Andrew said, "It's okay. If it fails, I will use healing techniques to repair his wounds and make him recover as before." Ethan nodded. "That's no problem." Garrett looked at Ethan expectantly after hearing this, and Ethan smiled and said, "Don't worry, I will do my best to cure you." Garrett said in a weak tone, "No, doctor, try to fail." Ethan's face was a little dark. This was the first time he had heard such a request for so many years as a copycat doctor. He gritted his teeth and said, "Bet on my machine body, I promise to cure you." Garrett. Andrew smiled, left Ethan's laboratory and came outside, where he found Hulk using a sledgehammer to smash the robot under the guidance of Taskmaster. "Yes, sledgehammer, Hulk loves to use hammers." The master of imitation taught in a cold voice, "Hulk, don't just smash around. Also, you have to save some energy to change your moves, don't use all your strength." "Hulk, smash it." Hulk didn't take it seriously and threw random hits at the flying robot. Taskmaster shook his head without getting angry and continued to teach Hulk that she never lacked patience. It's quite a loving scene. Andrew shook his head, went to the big boss's laboratory, and asked, "How is the research on cosmic storms going?" "Cosmic storm is a big project, and it won't be completed so quickly," the big boss said. "However, I have already achieved results with the potion that speeds up self-healing. After saying that, the big boss took out a box of plaster and a bottle of medicine. This plaster can remove scars and takes effect in 1 day. This medicine is a purified version of the previous medicine. After drinking it, the wound will heal quickly. They are all good, but the market potential is not high. If you keep working hard, you can develop into whitening and rejuvenation. Andrew said that the market potential he was talking about was not how much money it could be sold for, but how many souls it could exchange for. As much as possible. The big boss said that his energy is basically focused on the cosmic storm and Hulk's blood, and the quick self-healing potion is just a small project. Andrew said nothing more and went to check Howard and Trask's research. Howard is researching artificial intelligence and is almost successful, while Trask is building more mutant instruments that will provide him with a wealth of experience. In the end, he will create a real Sentinel robot. It's good and thriving. Andrew nodded with satisfaction. He looked at the factory area and thought to himself, now that there are tens of thousands of souls, perhaps we should consider building a city and truly start a mechanical civilization. In the isolated island prison, seeing the Red Devil disappear, Mystique looked a little ugly. She said to Magneto, "The plan failed, we can't raid the Mutant Academy." "It doesn't matter, everything can never go as planned." Magneto didn't care. He had failed countless times in his life and was not so glass-hearted. He thought about it and said, "We will lead people to attack New York. With Charles's character, he will definitely help S.H.I.E.L.D. stop us. At that time, you find an opportunity to contact Charles, and then quietly go to the Mutant Academy to use the brainwave enhancement device to kill all humans." Quote, "Kill all humans." Andrew's eyes lit up when he heard this. Lao Wan was very capable, and each plan was bigger than the last. When he and Mystique die, be sure to give them the Best Employee Award from Hell. Andrew smiled and said, "Of course, their plan may not succeed. Superheroes are not vegetarians. More importantly, there is a super boss on the X-Men side. It doesn't matter whether it works or not, just watch the show." Andrew said he was not in a hurry at all. Here, after listening to what Magneto said, Mystique nodded and said, "Just do it this way, the end of mankind is coming soon." Magneto thought for a moment and said, "Riven, record my X gene. If anything goes wrong, we can work together to defeat the X-Men." Mystique put her hand on Magneto and said with a smile, "They will definitely not think that we have two Magnetos." After Mystique finished copying the genes, Magneto Toad ordered, "Go to the lowest level and release all the abominations, vampires, and lizardmen who were used as experimental subjects. I believe they are happy to make humans pay the price." Quote. Mystique reminded, "Abomination is too dangerous. Don't unblock him yet, then we will just throw him from the sky. He won't die anyway. Hatred has always been in a frozen state. With his character, he will not be an experimental subject." Clear. Toad nodded and took a few mutants to rescue the experimental subjects. Then, Magneto said to all the prisoners in the prison through spiritual connection, "Everyone go to the deck, I will take you back to New York, and then you can do whatever you want." Long live Magneto. Mutants and felons cheered together, holding stolen guns and looking ferocious. It was time for New Yorkers to see their fury. Magneto nodded with satisfaction. He thought for a moment and moved all the missiles and bombs in the prison to the deck. These things would come in handy. Firefox was also imprisoned in the island prison. She frowned and said to Sloane, "Sloane, you can't do this, they will kill many people." "So what?" Sloane held the gun and said angrily, "S.H.I.E.L.D. has tortured me for so long, and I want them to die miserably." Sloane was also on the space station at the time. In order to confirm whether he had any powers, Garrett tortured him a lot during this time. Sloane was filled with resentment and his character gradually became distorted. "We are assassins of fate, not villains," shouted Firefox. "The assassin of destiny." Sloane sneered. "If I told you that the people you killed were actually orders placed by black market customers, what would you think?" Firefox shouted in disbelief. "What? This is impossible." "Nothing is impossible. You are just my tool. You were and still are." While speaking, Sloane opened his right hand, and a black bug the size of a fingernail flew out of his palm and burrowed into Firefox's cheek. Then, the black bug followed the blood and entered Firefox's brain. Firefox's eyes became confused, and she stood beside Sloane expressionlessly, waiting for his order. This is Sloane's superpower, the brain-eating worms, brain-eating worms can not only control others, but also eat the host's brain and reproduce more bugs. However, this insect has a fatal weakness, that is, it is afraid of low temperatures. At low temperatures, the insects will die. This power is terrible, but its shortcomings are also obvious, so no matter how Garrett tortured Sloane didn't say anything. As for blood tests and the like, the bugs haven't hatched yet, so there's no way to detect them at all. After controlling Firefox, Sloane went all out and took control of Big Backhead, Butcher, Tinker and others. He thought crazily. I want to use New Yorkers to feed my bugs, I want to make all New Yorkers become worms. Become my slave, and I will rule New York, and even the whole world. Soon, all the prisoners were transferred to the deck. Magneto opened his hands, and cracking sounds were heard from below the deck. A moment later, the deck broke away from the prison and surfaced with a crash. At the same time, the island prison slowly sank to the bottom of the sea. It wasn't over yet. Magneto waved his hand, the upper lid opened, and the bright moonlight poured into the prison. The prisoners were very excited to see the moon again, cheering loudly, and some even shot into the sky. Let's go. Magneto laughed, and the control deck flew towards New York at high speed. Magneto is not that impulsive. There must be a conspiracy when he chooses to attack New York. At the S.H.I.E.L.D. command, Nick Fury thought for a while and opened the live broadcast on Kuaishou familiarly. The new host of Bugle TV was broadcasting news about the island prison. Melinda is doing a great job and has become a host. Nick Fury nodded when he saw the Asian female host with a cold face on the screen. The other person was Melinda May, a level 7 agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Melinda said expressionlessly, "According to the news we received, there was a riot in the Lonely Island prison. Magneto has escaped and is leading an army of prisoners towards New York." Then, the screen split into two, with one half showing Melinda and the other half showing the flying prison deck, a large high-definition picture, much better than Nick Fury's satellite picture. I believe everyone is wondering what kind of prison is Gudao prison, and why have they never heard of it? Melinda said. Let's start from the beginning. Viewers should remember that our Clarion TV station has been investigating a mysterious organization that hides the truth and secretly deletes our mobile phone data. After verification by our TV station, this organization is called S.H.I.E.L.D., whose full name is the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. They are an agency affiliated with the United Nations and are responsible for handling strange incidents. Quote. Nick Fury looked confused. He asked Maria Hill, "Did Melinda defect?" "I think it's quite similar." Hill smiled and said, "Find a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent to break S.H.I.E.L.D. news." "The editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle is really talented." She asked, "Do you want to interrupt the live broadcast of Bugle TV?" "It cannot be interrupted. Kuaiduo has been ignoring our requests to monitor the content." Nick Fury shook his head and said, "In addition, Bugle TV is now famous all over the world. It is difficult to stop them. The United States is a free society, at least on the surface. After this incident is over, the media and the World Security Council will all attack me, and we must find a way to solve it." Nick Fury's eyes flashed slightly. The world cannot live without him and he cannot step down. In addition, if he steps down now, many things will be exposed, such as the money he embezzled, the safe house he has been building, and the things he has hidden, various secrets. The host Melinda was thinking, Director Fury would not wear small shoes for herself in the future, right? Of course, this doesn't stop her from continuing to break the news. The island prison is a prison where S.H.I.E.L.D. holds special criminals. Magneto, Abomination, and Mystique are all imprisoned in the island prison. Unfortunately, S.H.I.E.L.D. messed up as before. Magneto successfully escaped from prison, and he brought a large number of extremely vicious criminals to prepare to bloodbath New York, including abominations, lizard men, and vampires. New Yorkers, especially those in Brooklyn, please leave as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the disaster has begun again. Quote, S.H.I.E.L.D., my regards to your family. The citizens of New York yelled, "Why are you housing so many criminals if you don't have the ability?" What's even more outrageous is that the island prison is actually built off the coast of New York. I knew that disaster would not let us go so easily. Last time it was not the end, it was just the intermission. An old New Yorker sighed. It seems that New York has not turned around yet. While cursing and sighing, the citizens of Brooklyn ran wildly out. Magneto, Mystique, Abomination, Lizardmen, vampires, this is the rhythm of the end. SHIELD, this organization has been hiding the truth. In addition, my life experience is also related to them. Skye looked at the live broadcast, her eyes full of light. At this moment, Gwen's voice sounded from the speaker. Skye, Jessica and I are rushing to Brooklyn. Please help me calculate. Magneto and the others, where will it land? Skye replied. At a pier in Brooklyn, SHIELD and superheroes have set up defenses there. Okay. Gwen nodded and rushed to the dock at full speed. At the same time, Peter Parker, who had promised to go to the Mary Jane Opera, abandoned his motorcycle and a bouquet of flowers to become Spider-Man again, the bouquet of flowers he bought with all the money in his pocket. Disaster. Susan, who was about to go home, hesitated. After a moment, she gritted her teeth, put on her uniform and headed to the dock area. After all, she still wanted to be a superhero, which was a completely different feeling from being a female president. In the Brooklyn dock area, Tony Stark was wearing a new Mark suit, hiding behind a container and constantly drawing towards the sky. Tony, what are you doing? You feel so obscene, asked Dr. Banner, a big green man. He was wearing a large combat uniform and looked a little funny. He was not fierce at all, his face was honest. What is obscene? Tony said angrily. I've been waiting for months, and finally I've got the chance to avenge my shame. I'm going to kill that Magneto here with a laser, and by the way, Mystique. Dr. Banner was stunned. Laser? Yes, the laser will not be controlled by Magneto, and it is extremely fast. As long as I am caught off guard, it will definitely kill Magneto. Tony said excitedly. I want the whole world to know that I, Tony Stark, am no longer the same person I used to be. Moreover, I must avenge myself. If Magneto is not prepared, the success rate is indeed very high. Dr. Banner thought for a moment and nodded. Tony said, of course. By the way, Dr. Banner, are you sure you can defeat that abomination now? Dr. Banner smiled. Of course, no. Tony complained. You still speak so loudly without you. Although I'm not sure I can defeat Abomination, I can be used as a human shield and you can defeat him. Dr. Banner said with great self-knowledge that although he had been training during this period, he was a weak scholar with no motor nerves and could never become a master no matter how hard he trained. Tony said, when I kill Magneto, I will help you. From now on, everyone will call me Assassin King Tony. Old Green Goblin Norman looked unhappy when he heard the conversation between Tony and Dr. Banner. He even wanted to tip off Magneto, but he thought about it and did not do so. It's not that Norman's conscience found out, but that he didn't have Magneto's phone number, so it was difficult to inform him. The stock price, how can the Osborn Group's stock price rise? Norman had a frown on his face. If the stock price did not rise, his position would be unstable. If his position was unstable, he would not be able to invest the company's funds in the research of human enhancement drugs. Norman still has no intention of giving up on the human enhancement potion, because his son Harry needs the human enhancement potion, and he does not want his son to become a lunatic like Blonsky. There are more and more superheroes. Professor Charles, who was sitting in a wheelchair, sighed, while Wolverine was holding a cigar and said, there are not many reliable ones. They are either narcissists or funny characters. The X-Men laughed, and Professor Charles shook his head. He vaguely felt that the times were changing, but he didn't know if there would be a place for their mutants to gain a foothold in the future era. In addition to the above people, the Fantastic Three and Barton also came. The Thunderbolt in uniform asked Barton curiously, Barton, what special powers do you have? The bow and arrow are my special power. Barton replied coolly, and the Human Torch wanted to ask anything else. At this time, Professor Charles sounded the alarm, Magneto is coming. Everyone hurriedly looked up and saw the deck of the Lonely Island prison flying towards them quickly. Standing at the front was Magneto. He immediately noticed the superheroes and agents on the dock and raised his hands with disdain. This is your thing, give it back to you. Magneto waved his hand, and dozens of missiles plus a super bomb for self-destruction were shot towards the dock area at the same time. Everyone's expressions changed drastically, and Coulson hurriedly shouted, use non-metallic means to intercept the missile, and the remaining people will avoid it. I come. The Human Torch roared and pushed his hands forward, sending 2 huge fireballs towards the incoming missile. Cyclops didn't talk nonsense. He put his hand next to his glasses and swept a red laser across the missiles in the sky. Storm's eyes turned white and she flew into the sky. Lightnings fell from the sky. Chin used her telekinesis to control the missiles to collide together. Magneto couldn't help but glance at her. When did her telekinesis become so strong? Can you even resist your own magnetism? Magneto's eyes narrowed slightly. Has her hidden power awakened? Depend on. Tony cursed and flew out to use laser attack missiles. Although he was far away from being hit by the missiles, others would, and he couldn't just watch his own people die. Tony cannot be the Assassin King because he is not ruthless enough. A real assassin will not care about the life or death of his own people, but will only wait for the best assassination opportunity like a dead thing. Although Tony is careless, narcissistic, arrogant, venomous, irreverent, arrogant, and obsessed with winning and losing, there is no doubt that he is a real superhero, and he will become more and more responsible. With the efforts of everyone, the missiles exploded in the air one after another, air waves swept across, flames flew randomly, and the entire dock area was shaking. After successfully dealing with the missiles, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, more than 10 missiles emerged from the sea and bombarded everyone in the dock area one after another. Everyone's expressions changed, but they had no time to stop them. At the critical moment, a translucent spiritual barrier appeared. A large number of missiles hit the barrier and exploded. The barrier rippled, but it was very strong and did not break. Immediately afterwards, the barrier disappeared, and Professor Charles controlled the wheelchair and slowly came forward. It was obvious that he was the one who took action just now. Magneto controlled the prison deck and stopped in front of the dock area. Then, he asked Professor Charles, "Is this your new ability?" Professor Charles nodded. "Yes, a spiritual barrier to protect everything. Even the ability to evolve as a guardian. Charles, you are really..." Magneto couldn't help but shake his head, and said, "Unfortunately, what mutants need is not protection, but offense. Forget it, let's not talk about this. Charles, I want to see if you can stop me today." "Old friend, you're not wearing a helmet today." Professor Charles smiled slightly, and the powerful spiritual power penetrated the collective consciousness and entered Magneto's consciousness. Using the brainwave intensification device, Professor Charles cannot individually target a person in the group consciousness, but face-to-face, there is no problem. However, after all, there is a group consciousness blocking him. Professor Charles can only interfere with Magneto, but cannot completely control him. "We must not let Charles know of our plans." Magneto's expression changed, and he hurriedly fought with Scanner against the erosion of Professor Charles. Professor Charles keenly noticed something, and he said, "Eric, you are hiding a big secret." "I hide so many secrets, Charles, you can't control me today." While Magneto struggled to hold on, the control deck was torn apart, and mutants and felons flew into Brooklyn from different directions. The area where Magneto stood did not move. Toad, Saber-toothed Tiger and others stood beside him. As for Mystique, she had disappeared. Coulson's expression changed and he shouted hurriedly, "Hurry up and catch up. We must not let them hurt the citizens. Professor, I leave Magneto to you." "Good." Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Iron Man, the Fantastic Three, Dr. Banner, the Old Green Goblin and others all chased the prisoners, leaving only the X-Men in the dock area. "Lao Wan is such a good man. I shouldn't have hit him before." Looking at the panic-stricken Brooklyn area, Andrew, who was drinking tea and watching a movie on the rooftop, couldn't help but nod. He snapped his fingers, and the Reverse Cross spaceship fell from the sky. The robots and Black Widows once again started working to collect souls for the devil. "Boss, I apply to join the battle. I want Magneto to know that his ability is not as good as my instrument." Trask shouted excitedly, and Andrew said, "Don't worry, let the bullet fly for a while." "Ah, have you gotten a little taller?" Trask, who has a mechanical body, said, "No, I have always been 4 meters tall." Howard on the side rolled his eyes secretly. "You were only 3 meters tall before, okay. No, you were only a little over 1 meter tall at the beginning. Defeat the X-Men and embrace a mutant future." On the deck, everyone in the Magneto dynasty ordered. Saber-toothed Tiger couldn't wait. Hearing the words, he immediately jumped from the sky in front of Wolverine and shouted, "Jimmy, long time no see." Wolverine looked at the saber-toothed tiger who had shortened his hair and asked in astonishment, "Big steel teeth. Do I know you very well? Also, who is Jimmy? This name sounds so stupid. I'm your brother whose blood is thicker than water. As for Jimmy, that's your name. I think it's stupid too. It was given to you by your doctor father." The saber-toothed tiger said, "Your doctor father is not your real father. Your real father is your gardener, which is my father. Later, he was stabbed to death by you." Wolverine looked confused. What the hell, isn't this a lot of information? Wolverine, who had always wanted to retrieve his memory, suddenly felt like giving up. His past seemed a bit tragic. "I'll help you remember, my brother." The saber-toothed tiger laughed loudly, showed his claws and pounced on Wolverine like a hungry tiger. Wolverine dodged while shouting, "Who on earth are you?" "I said, we are brothers." Saber-toothed tiger shouted that the cosmic storm greatly enhanced his strength and speed, so he is not afraid of Wolverine who possesses adamantium alloy. Wolverine has never been a good-tempered person, so when he saw saber-toothed tiger trying to show off, he cursed and brandished his claw blade to fight with the opponent. Soon, his claw blade and saber-toothed tiger's claws pierced the opponent's chest at the same time, and blood sprayed in the air. Bloom freely. Brothers and brothers respect each other, it's really touching. Andrew said. Howard and others were speechless. Is this also called respect between brothers and brothers? While saber-toothed tiger and Wolverine were fighting fiercely, the mutants of the Brotherhood jumped onto the dock to fight against their arch-rivals, the X-Men. Toad jumped back and forth flexibly in the dock area, and no lightning could hit him. Then, he opened his mouth and shot acid at Storm in the air like a barrage of cannons. That's disgusting. Storm avoided the acid with the help of the wind, and then she gathered a large thunderball and blasted it towards the Toad. The Toad jumped onto the container and shot Storm with its tongue like a sharp arrow. Storm hurriedly avoided it, but unexpectedly, the Toad's tongue could actually turn and hit Storm with a bang. Storm was thrown away on the spot. The Toad was unyielding and sprayed acid at Storm. Storm rolled to avoid it, and then she flew into the sky to fight the Toad again. Cyclops faced the enhanced weightlessness, and he had no chance to attack. He kept shaking up and down in the air, and he was extremely embarrassed. Colossus and the others were also fighting, but Chin stayed beside Professor Charles to protect him and did not take action. At the same time, a certain street in Brooklyn. Bang! Abomination hit the street hard, making a big crater in the ground. Immediately afterwards, the coldness on his body quickly disappeared, and his eyes gradually changed from confusion to ferocity. It's hate. The surrounding citizens were shocked and ran outside wildly. Anyone who has watched the live broadcast on Bugle TV knows how terrifying the hatred is. Andrew waved his hand and pulled the citizens into the illusion. A moment later, dozens of robots descended from the sky and took away the contractors who had signed the contract. Abomination ignored the fleeing citizens and robots. He clenched his fists and let out a roar that shattered all the surrounding glass. Hulk. Blonsky, here I come. A big green man walked over from the side. When Hatred saw him, he was happy at first, and then said with a look of disgust, "What I want is Hulk, not a funny character like you." Dr. Banner shouted dissatisfied, "You are funny and hateful. I will not let you do anything else. You are my mistake and I want to make up for it." "Just you." Abomination smiled disdainfully and rushed towards Dr. Banner with a rumble. Dr. Banner took a deep breath and struggled to catch up. Boom! Two huge bodies collided hard, the ground collapsed, and a wave of air swept around. This time, Dr. Banner did not retreat. He roared and punched Abomination on the head. Abomination grabbed Dr. Banner's fist and hit his head hard. Dr. Banner staggered back, and Abomination stepped forward and kicked him hundreds of meters away. Abomination scoffed, "You're as funny as ever." Dr. Banner was furious, got up from the ground and rushed towards Abomination again. As he said, he couldn't defeat Abomination, but it was not a big problem to hold him back. Wherever the two big men hit each other, there were screams, and robots kept falling from the sky and taking away the contractors. Not long after, Iron Man flew over. He looked at the robots and hesitated whether to go to Howard, but after thinking about it, he decided to deal with the Abomination with Dr. Banner first. On the other side, 2 lizards and several vampires fell from the sky and pounced viciously on the citizens. These 2 lizard men were compatriots developed by Dr. Lizard. After S.H.I.E.L.D. captured them, they did not inject them with an antidote, but instead locked them in an isolated island prison for research. Therefore, the 2 lizard men were full of anger towards humans. When they saw the citizens, they showed no mercy. With one claw, the 2 citizens were directly torn into pieces. The vampires were also tortured, and they rushed forward and dug their fangs deeply into the necks of the fleeing citizens. Why did you run out again? It's not over yet. Spider-Man arrived here and immediately entangled the 2 lizard men with spider webs. Seeing this, the vampires immediately dropped their prey and pounced on Spider-Man with their big mouths open. Spider-Man nimbly avoided and kicked the vampires away several times, but the vampires quickly got up like nothing happened and pounced on Spider-Man again. At the same time, 2 lizard men tore open the spider web and each picked up a car and threw it at Spider-Man. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.